Kale woke up and immediately knew something was wrong. The ceiling was wrong, the smell was wrong. The weight of the blanket on his body was wrong. Too heavy, too silky. The kind that costs more than his old apartment's rent. He sat up slowly and looked around at a room that was clearly designed to make normal people feel small and unworthy. Gold edges on the furniture, curtains that touched the floor like a royal gown, a mirror across the room so large that it showed him his full reflection without mercy. And the reflection was not his. He had brown hair now, sharp cheekbones, a jawline so clean it looked carved. He was wearing a white silk sleep shirt that was open at the collar, and he looked honestly, offensively handsome, which would have been great, really great, except he recognized this face. This was Kale Doran's face, the villain, the secondary character from the web novel he had been reading the night before his death. He had fallen asleep with his phone in his hand, the novel open on chapter 42, the chapter where Kale Doran publicly humiliates the male lead, Ren Castell, in front of the entire noble court. 2 days later in the story, Kale Doran is dragged to the dungeons and sentenced to death. The readers cheered. The comment section said things like "finally" and "took long enough" and "rot there." He, the original reader, had also thought, well, he deserved it. And now he was that person. He sat there for a long moment, then he said, very calmly, "I died and came back as the man everyone hates. Cool, 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 cool." A knock came at the door. "My lord, your schedule for today. Cancel it," he said. A pause. "All of it, my lord. Every single thing." Another pause, longer this time. "Including the meeting with Lord Ren Castell?" He closed his eyes. Of course, of course. The male lead was already in the picture. The original Kale Doran had arranged a private confrontation for today, presumably to say something cruel and begin the chain of events that led to his own destruction. That was what the character had been like, petty, competitive, deeply, deeply insecure in a way that expressed itself as cruelty. He was not going to do that. "Cancel it," he said again. "Tell him I am ill." He heard the servant hesitate, but the door did not open. "Yes, my lord." He lay back down on the ridiculous silk pillow and stared at the ceiling. Okay, he needed a plan. He had died, a car accident, he vaguely remembered. Rain, a truck, a moment of terrible clarity, and been reborn inside a novel he had read on his commute. The novel had maybe 60 chapters. He had read 42. He did not know exactly how the story ended, but he knew the basic shape of it. The villain gets punished. The male lead rises to power. Everyone lives happily ever after, except the villain. The villain dies in prison. That was not going to happen to him. New plan. Be the most boring, unoffensive, invisible nobleman in the history of this kingdom. Do nothing. Say nothing cruel. Attend no dramatic confrontations. Let the male lead do his heroic thing in peace. Retire early if possible. Maybe get a garden. He had always wanted a garden. He spent the rest of the morning reading through Kale Doran's personal journals, which revealed the character had been absolutely exhausting to be around. Every second page was about Ren Castell. Obsessively, bitterly, furiously about Ren Castell. How Ren looked at him, how Ren did not look at him, how Ren was too popular, too talented, too everything. He set the journal down and rubbed his face. "You were in love with him," he said out loud to the empty room. To the original Kale Doran's ghost or soul or whatever had vacated this body. You were desperately in love with him, and you had absolutely no idea. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the estate grounds. Green and carefully kept a fountain somewhere. 3 servants walking in a line below. It was genuinely beautiful, and he was going to appreciate it from a safe and drama-free distance for as long as possible. Then he saw the front gates. A horse, a rider in silver and gray. Tall, dark-haired, posture like someone who had been told since birth that he was important, and had somehow not let it ruin him. The rider looked up at the window, as if he felt the gaze, and their eyes met across the distance. Ren Castell, the male lead. He had come anyway. He stepped back from the window. His heart was doing something strange and fast that he chose not to examine closely. "I said cancel," he muttered, mostly to himself. "I said I was ill. I said..." A knock at the front doors, deep and loud, echoed through the entire building. He sat down on the edge of the bed, pressed his hands to his face, and made a very small sound of despair. It was not even noon yet. Ren Castell did not accept cancellations. This was, apparently, something Kale had failed to account for. He stood at the top of the staircase, wearing the most boring outfit he had found in Kale Doran's wardrobe, which was still nicer than anything he had worn in his previous life, and watched the front doors open below to reveal the most annoyingly perfect person he had ever seen in any world. Ren was tall. The novels had described him as tall, but reading tall was different from seeing a man walk through your entrance hall and fill it with his presence like he belonged there more than the furniture did. He had dark eyes and dark hair, and a face that was made for looking thoughtful and trustworthy, which, in a court full of backstabbers, was both rare and devastating. He looked up at Kale on the stairs, and something flickered in his expression. Not hostility, something else, something careful. "You look well for someone who is ill," Ren said. "I had a recovery," Kale said. "Very fast, recent medical advancement." Ren stared at him. Kale stared back. "I came," Ren said slowly, "because your letter this morning was strange." "I did not write a letter this morning. Your seal was on it." He was going to have a serious conversation with his head servant later. "What did it say?" Ren reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it up but did not hand it over. His expression was now unreadable, which Kale found deeply inconvenient. "It invited me to discuss the matter of the northern trade routes," and then at the bottom, in different ink, it said, and I am quoting directly, "Forget it. Do not come." "I changed my mind. Burn this letter." He stared at the letter. He stared at the letter. "So," Ren continued, "naturally I came immediately. That is not what naturally means. It is when I am involved." Ren folded the letter and tucked it back in his coat with the energy of a man who had won something. "I want to know what you wanted to say before you changed your mind." Kale descended the stairs because looming at the top felt theatrical, and he was trying very hard not to be theatrical. He stopped at the bottom, at a reasonable distance, and looked at Ren with what he hoped was a calm and unbothered expression. "The original letter was a mistake," he said. "The second note was the correction. You should have heeded the correction. I rarely heed things." Clearly. Ren looked at him with those dark eyes, and there was something genuinely searching in the look, like he was trying to find something in Kale's face that he expected to be there and was confused by its absence, probably expecting hostility. The original Kale would have already said something cutting by now, something designed to wound. He just didn't have it in him. It wasn't who he was, even in this body. "The northern trade routes," he said finally, because he needed to say something. "If you are truly here, we may as well discuss them. I have no interest in the current arrangement, and I suspect you don't either." Ren blinked, slowly, like a very beautiful and very confused owl. "You want to talk about trade?" "That is what I said. You, Kale Doran, want to sit down and discuss northern trade routes." "Is that sentence difficult? I can repeat it more slowly." A pause. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, Ren laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, short and surprised, like it escaped before he could stop it. He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth immediately after, as if he could push it back in. Kale felt something warm shift in his chest and firmly ignored it. They sat across from each other in the east sitting room, which was less aggressively gold than the rest of the manor, and a servant brought tea that Kale did not order but was grateful for. He wrapped his hands around the cup and let the heat steady him. They talked about trade routes for 40 minutes. It was the most normal 40 minutes Kale had experienced since waking up in this body. Ren was sharp, genuinely, irritatingly sharp. He caught implications fast and responded without wasting words. He disagreed twice, and both times he explained exactly why, with evidence, without condescension. Kale found himself leaning forward at one point without meaning to. When Ren stood to leave, he paused at the door. "You are different," he said. Not an accusation, just an observation. "People change," Kale said. Ren looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly too long. "Yes," he said, "they do." After the door closed, Kale sat alone in the sitting room for a long time. His heart was doing the strange fast thing again. He poured himself more tea. He was going to need a lot of tea. Within a week, people were talking. This was, Kale understood, inevitable. He had made the mistake of existing in a small noble society, while behaving differently from how they expected him to behave. He had skipped 2 of the court gatherings that the original Kale had always attended, for the purpose of causing scenes. He had been polite to 3 people the original Kale had been publicly rude to. He had smiled at a servant in public, which apparently was worth a 4-paragraph letter to the gossip columnist of the kingdom's most read broadsheet. The headline was, "Is Lord Doran ill?" Subheadline, "Sources close to the estate confirm strange calm. One servant reports being thanked." He held the paper, read it twice, and set it down. He picked it up and read it a 3rd time because surely it wasn't as absurd as he thought. It was exactly as absurd as he thought. The second rumor was worse. It spread through 3 dinner parties and arrived at his door in the form of his cousin Mira, who was cheerful and nosy, and arrived unannounced on a Thursday morning with a basket of fruit and the expression of someone who had information to sell. "They are saying," Mira said, setting the basket down and sitting without being invited, "that you met with Ren Castell." "I met with many people. Privately, for 40 minutes. We discussed trade." Mira stared at him with enormous brown eyes that saw too much. "Kale, you once threw a wine glass at him at a party." "I don't remember that." "It was 6 months ago. There were 40 witnesses." He pinched the bridge of his nose. Right. He kept forgetting that the original Kale had a whole history of behavior that he was now inexplicably not repeating. "I am choosing a different approach to that relationship." "What kind of approach?" "A civil one." Mira was quiet for a second. Then she said very gently, as if speaking to someone who might be fragile, "Are you having a breakdown?" "No." "Are you sure? Because last month you called Ren Castell a—" "I didn't call him anything. That was—" He stopped. He couldn't exactly say that was the previous soul in this body. He pressed his hands together. "I was wrong to say whatever I said. I am choosing to be better." Mira stared at him for a long, long moment. Then she reached across the table, took one of her own fruit, and bit into it thoughtfully. "He came to see you again yesterday," she said. He looked up. "What?" "Ren Castell. He was seen outside your gates. He did not come in. He sat on his horse for a while and then left. Something happened in his chest that was inconvenient and unexplained. Why would he do that?" Mira shrugged. "You tell me. You are the one having the civil relationship with him." He didn't have an answer. He thought about it for the rest of the day, between reading through estate paperwork and writing 3 polite refusals to invitations he had no interest in attending. Why would Ren come and not come in? The male lead of the novel was not shy. He was bold and principled, and had exactly 0 history of hesitating about anything. Unless he was unsure. Unless something about their meeting had made him unsure. He stared at the wall for a while. Then, against every instinct telling him to stay uninvolved, he wrote a short note, 7 words. He sealed it with his ring, and sent it before he could change his mind. The note said, "The gates are open, if you want." He did not sleep well that night. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, someone knocked on the front door. He heard his servant answer it. He heard a familiar voice say, "I received a note." He sat at the breakfast table, poured his tea with a completely steady hand, and thought, "Okay, this is fine. This is totally, completely fine." Ren walked in, looking like he had not lost any sleep at all, which Kale found deeply unfair. "You sent for me," Ren said. "I opened the gates," Kale said. "There is a difference." Ren sat down across from him, helped himself to the spare cup without asking, and said, "Tell me what you actually want, Kale." The sound of his name in that voice did something strange to the air in the room. He wrapped both hands around his own cup and said, very carefully, "I want to stop being enemies." Ren looked at him for a long moment. "All right," he said. Just that, all right. As if it were that simple. As if everything between them could pivot on 2 quiet words over a breakfast table. Maybe it could. Not enemies was not the same as friends. Kale understood this. He had negotiated office politics in his previous life, and he understood that the space between hostility and warmth was wide and full of landmines. They were cordial now. They attended the same meetings without disaster. Ren stopped looking at him like he was waiting for an attack. Kale stopped bracing for the plot to push them into a confrontation he didn't want. It was going well. He was genuinely proud of himself. Then he found the letter. It was in the original Kale's desk drawer, buried under account books and old correspondence. Unsealed, unfinished, written in handwriting that was the same as his own, but with a different energy, sharper and more erratic. He almost put it down unread. Then he saw the first line. It said, "I know you hate me, and I know you are right to." He sat down slowly and read the whole thing. It was a letter Kale Doran had written to Ren, probably 3 years ago based on the date in the corner, and had never sent. It was not cruel. It was the opposite of cruel. It was raw and honest and desperate in a way that the character's public face never was. He wrote about watching Ren succeed at everything and feeling simultaneously proud and ashamed of his own smallness. He wrote about the night their fathers had fought over a political deal when they were 17, and how everything had broken between them over money and ambition and the pride of old men. He wrote about missing something he wasn't sure had ever existed. At the bottom he had written, "I think I have been angry at you because being angry is easier than admitting that I am afraid you will never see me as anything worth seeing." Kale set the letter down. He sat with it for a long time. He thought about the original Kale Doran, the one whose body he wore, the one who had been written as a villain and had played the part because playing a part felt safer than admitting to something real. He thought about how the comment section had called him petty and cruel and had cheered his downfall without ever knowing about the unfinished letter in the desk drawer. He thought about Ren, who had come back, who had sat down across from him and said all right, who had been outside the gates. He thought about the thing in his own chest that he was still very carefully not examining. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. That evening, he went to the court reception he had been avoiding for 2 weeks. He told himself it was because he could not avoid social obligations forever. He did not tell himself that he knew Ren would be there. He found Ren standing near the window, talking to someone, and he waited at a distance until the conversation ended. Ren turned and saw him, and something in his face shifted. Not surprise, exactly, something softer. "You came," Ren said. "It was time," Kale said. They stood together at the window for a while without needing to fill the silence. The room around them was full of conversation and music and the clink of glasses. Someone across the room laughed very loudly. Neither of them looked away from the window. "Can I ask you something?" Kale said. "You can try," Ren said, which was not quite yes, but was as close as he got. "The night our fathers argued, when we were 17, he watched Ren go still beside him. What did you think of me after that?" A pause. "Long enough to be honest. I thought you were the only person in that room who looked as miserable as I felt," Ren said quietly. "And I thought that if things had been different, we might have been on the same side." He said nothing. Ren turned to look at him. "Why are you asking me this now?" "I found something old," he said. "It made me think about things I had not considered before." Ren looked at him with those eyes that saw too much, the same way Mira looked at him, except when Mira did it, it was annoying, and when Ren did it, it was something else entirely. "Are you all right?" Ren asked, and the question was so quiet and so genuine that he almost laughed. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think I will be. It happened at the wrong time, as these things always do. There was a political crisis, because there was always a political crisis in stories like this one. A trade delegation from the northern provinces arrived 3 days early and demanded an emergency council session, and somewhere in the middle of the scheduling chaos, a document leaked. A private correspondence between Lord Doran's estate and a merchant group that the original Kale had been dealing with before his soul had been replaced by a very confused reader from a different world entirely. The document looked, to anyone reading it without context, like evidence of financial manipulation, maybe even treason, depending on the interpretation and how generous the council was feeling. It was not generous. Kale sat in the council room and listened to the accusations and kept his expression carefully neutral because panic was not going to help him, and also because a small part of his brain was noting with detached horror that this was exactly the moment in the novel that began Kale Doran's downfall. He had read this chapter. He remembered it. The document, the accusations, the trial. In the original novel, Kale Doran had responded with defensive rage and made everything worse. He was not going to do that. He said, clearly and without raising his voice, I was not aware of this correspondence. I will provide full access to my estate records and cooperate with any formal inquiry. This was apparently so unexpected that the room went quiet. He looked at the faces around the table. Political animals, all of them. They had prepared for a fight. He had declined to fight. And then Ren spoke. I will serve as independent witness to the inquiry, Ren said, from the far end of the table, in a tone that was not loud but that everyone heard. Given the history between Lord Doran and myself, my involvement should satisfy any concern about partiality in his favor. Several heads turned. Kale turned too, and found Ren looking at him steadily. He didn't understand. In the novel, Ren had been one of the voices calling for Kale's punishment. He had been just. He had believed the evidence. He had stood on the side of the truth as he understood it, which was the truth as it was presented to him, because no one had offered him a different version. He had not stepped forward. He was stepping forward now. After the session, in the corridor, Kale caught up to him. Why did you do that? He asked. Ren turned. He looked tired, which was new. Ren in the novel never looked tired. Because you asked for an inquiry rather than a fight. Innocent people ask for inquiries. Guilty people attack. That is not a safe bet on your part. I know. If the investigation goes badly, I know, Ren said again. He stared at him. You don't know me well enough to take that risk. Something moved in Ren's eyes. Something that had been building there for weeks. Maybe I know you better than you think, he said. Or maybe I want to. The corridor was empty. The stone walls held the sound in. His heartbeat was very loud in his own ears. Ren, he said, and his voice came out wrong, lower, and more honest than he intended. Don't, Ren said quietly, not unkindly. Not yet. Let the inquiry finish first. Let everything settle. He paused. I'm not going anywhere. He stood there after Ren walked away and did something he had not done since waking up in this world. He let himself feel it, all of it. The strange, terrifying warmth, the impossibility of it. The fact that he had come here planning to be invisible and instead had somehow walked into the center of the story in a way that had nothing to do with the plot he had read and everything to do with choices neither of them had made in the original novel. He leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling and thought, this is not going according to any plan I had. Then he thought, but maybe that is okay. The inquiry took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of investigators going through his estate records with the methodical enthusiasm of people who enjoyed finding problems. 2 weeks of Kale sitting calmly in rooms and answering questions and resisting the urge to explain that the person who had set up the suspicious correspondence had been himself, but also not himself, a previous occupant of this body, a fictional character who had probably had reasons that were never going to make complete sense because villains in web novels were not usually written with complex inner lives, unless the novel was specifically about them. On day 4, Mira visited. She sat across from him with her fruit basket and her 2 seeing eyes and said, You are very calm for someone whose estate is under investigation. Panic would not help. It would help me feel like you understand the situation. I understand the situation. She peeled something orange and ate it thoughtfully. Ren Castell visited the investigators yesterday. He looked up. Voluntarily, she added. He brought his own documentation. Trade records from the last 3 years showing that the merchant group in question had approached him first and that he had declined. It establishes a pattern of behavior that makes the correspondence look different. He was quiet for a moment. He didn't tell me he was going to do that. Would you have let him if he had asked? No, he thought. He would have said it was too much risk. He would have tried to handle it alone because that was what he did. Even now, even after everything. No, he said out loud. Mira nodded like she had known. He knows you too. On day 9, there was a development that no one expected. One of the merchants in the correspondence came forward, voluntarily. He had heard about the inquiry and about Ren Castell's involvement, and had apparently calculated that getting ahead of the story was better than waiting for it to catch up with him. He submitted a full account of the original negotiation, which confirmed that Kale Doran had agreed to the arrangement, and then 2 months later, right around the time a certain reader from a different world had moved into the body, had sent a letter refusing to continue and returning the initial payment. Which Kale had no memory of doing, because he hadn't done it. The original soul, the original Kale Doran, in the weeks before the accident, that had apparently created enough chaos in the cosmic administration to allow a new occupant, had changed his mind, had pulled back from the deal, had tried, quietly, to be better. He sat with this information alone in his study at night and felt something complicated and sad. The villain had tried. In those last weeks, the villain had actually tried. And then he had died and been replaced, and nobody, not even the people who hated him, had known. He thought about the unfinished letter in his pocket. I think I have been angry at you because being angry is easier than admitting that I am afraid. We were not so different, he said quietly to the room, to whoever was listening or not listening, you and I. On day 14, the council cleared him. The hall was full when the decision was announced. He heard it and nodded and said thank you with appropriate gravity, and spent the next hour accepting polite congratulations from people who had probably expected him to be convicted, and were adjusting their opinions in real time. Across the room, he found Ren watching him. He excused himself from the conversation he was in and walked over. Thank you, he said. The two words felt too small. You would have been fine without me, Ren said. Maybe, but I was not alone because of you. That mattered. Ren looked at him, and the careful distance he always kept in his expression was not quite in place. Something underneath it was showing through. You said you wanted to stop being enemies, Ren said. Back at the beginning. Do you remember? I remember. What do you want now? He had been asking himself that question for weeks. He thought about the garden he had wanted, the quiet life, the plan to be invisible. He looked at Ren. Something I did not plan for, he said honestly. Ren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know the feeling. They were not good at this. This was the thing no one warned you about. In novels, when two characters finally moved past their history, there was usually a montage, sweet moments, growing closeness, a natural progression toward the confession that everyone had been waiting for. In reality, which is what this was, even if it was technically fictional, two people who had been on opposite sides of something for years did not suddenly become graceful about being on the same side. Kale forgot to say things, important things. He would realize 3 hours after a conversation that Ren had said something that deserved a real response, and he had just changed the subject because emotional honesty made his brain short-circuit, and apparently this was true in any world he existed in. Ren, for his part, said too much in the wrong moments, and too little in the right ones. He was decisive about everything except this, which he seemed to be approaching with the same careful slowness that you used around something you were afraid of breaking. They had dinner twice. It was nice, and also terrible, because Kale spent both dinners very aware of exactly how Ren held his fork, and exactly how his face changed when he was about to disagree with something, which was information he did not need to be collecting, but was collecting anyway. Mira sent him a letter that said only, just tell him. She underlined it twice. He wrote back telling her to mind her business. She sent another letter that said, you have no business sense when it comes to your own heart. She was not wrong, which was annoying. The complication arrived in the form of Lord Evander Castine, who was handsome and charming and had known Ren for years, and who began appearing at every event Ren attended with the practiced ease of someone who had been there before Kale and would like to be there after him. He was not jealous. He was simply noticing things with great detail and frequency. He noticed that Evander made Ren laugh easily. He noticed that they had history he was not part of. He noticed that Evander touched Ren's arm when he talked to him and that Ren did not move away. He noticed all of this very carefully, and then he went home and sat in his study and stared at nothing. He was not Kale Doran, not really. He had no claim. He had not even said anything clearly. He had said something he did not plan for and let it sit there, unfinished, because he was apparently constitutionally incapable of finishing important things, like certain letters. He took the original letter out of his pocket. He had been carrying it for weeks without knowing why. He read the last line again. I think I have been angry at you, because being angry is easier than admitting that I am afraid you will never see me as anything worth seeing. He thought, I know exactly how you felt. Then he thought, but you never sent it. You kept it in a drawer. You let your chance close. He thought, I am not going to make the same mistake. He sat down. He wrote, not a grand letter, not a long one, just something true, in as simple and honest words as he could find. He sealed it. He sent it before dawn so he could not change his mind. The next morning, at a time that was extremely early and inconsiderate, someone knocked on his door. He was still in his sleep shirt. His hair was in chaos. He looked, objectively, terrible. He opened the door anyway. Ren was standing there. He was holding the letter, open. He looked like he had not slept. He looked like he had been writing since before sunrise. He looked at Kale standing in the doorway, being obviously unprepared, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, you could have told me to my face. I was afraid you would say something kind and I would not survive it, Kale said. Ren stared at him. Then he exhaled, long and slow, like he was setting something heavy down. Evander is a friend, he said. An old one, nothing more. That is not. It is exactly what you were thinking about, and we both know it. He stepped closer, and the early morning light was behind him, and he said quietly, I am not interested in Evander. His heart was beating everywhere. Who are you interested in? He asked, and his voice was very steady. He was proud of it. Ren looked at him the way he had looked at him in the corridor weeks ago, with something showing through the careful surface. You know the answer to that, Ren said. He did not get the quiet life he planned. He got something better. The garden happened first, actually. He had started it in the 3rd month, in a corner of the estate grounds that had been unused and overgrown, and he worked on it himself in the early mornings before the day got complicated. Tomatoes, some herbs, flowers in 3 colors because color had been absent from the original Kale's life, and he was correcting that. Ren found out about the garden on a Tuesday. He arrived at the estate unannounced, which had become his signature move, and could not find Kale in the house, and eventually walked out to the grounds and stood at the edge of the garden, looking at Kale crouched in the dirt, with his sleeves rolled up, doing something to a tomato plant. You are gardening, Ren said. Yes. You, Kale Doran, are gardening. You say my full name like it surprises you every time. He looked up. Are you going to stand there or are you going to help? Ren looked at his coat. He looked at the dirt. He looked back at his coat. Then he took his coat off, folded it over the fence with extreme care, rolled up his sleeves, and came into the garden. He was terrible at it. He pulled up something that was not a weed and then apologized to it, which was maybe the most human thing Kale had ever seen him do. Kale laughed properly, the kind of laugh that surprised him by existing. Do not laugh, Ren said, holding the plant he had murdered. I am absolutely going to laugh. It looked like a weed. It was a basil seedling I planted last week. They look the same. They absolutely do not look the same. He took the plant from Ren's hand. Their fingers touched. Neither of them moved for a moment. You owe me a basil plant. I will buy you 10 basil plants, Ren said. His voice had gone quieter. He was looking at Kale with that look. One is fine, Kale said. His voice had also gone quieter. They were very close together in the small garden. Kale, Ren said. Yes. I would like to. Yes, he said again, before Ren could finish. Ren blinked. I didn't finish the sentence. I know what you were going to say. You don't know. You were going to ask if you could kiss me, Kale said. The answer is yes. You can finish the sentence if you want, but it will not change the answer. Ren stared at him. Then he smiled. Not the careful public smile. A real one, warm and slightly undone at the edges. You are very strange, Ren said. I am aware. He kissed him in the garden, surrounded by tomatoes and the herbs and the 3 colors of flowers, in the early morning light, with dirt on both of their hands. It was unheroic and soft, and it lasted longer than either of them planned. When they stepped back, Ren looked at him with an expression that Kale was going to be thinking about for a very long time. I have been wanting to do that, Ren said, since approximately the 2nd time I had tea in your sitting room. You could have said so. You could have said so. I sent a letter. After 4 months of saying nothing. He considered this. I was gathering courage. In extremely small amounts. Courage cannot be rushed. He turned back to the garden. Also, you pulled up my basil. I am going to hear about the basil forever. Until you replace it. Which could be tomorrow. Ren laughed again. This one was even better than the first. It was the laugh of someone who was not managing himself around Kale anymore. Not calculating, not careful, just present. The months after that were not quiet. They were never going to be quiet, because the world they lived in had politics and crises, and Mira, who found out about the garden kiss within approximately 48 hours, and sent him a letter that was just the word, finally written very large. He wrote back, "Please never write to me again." She wrote back, "Not a chance." There was a second political crisis in autumn that they navigated together. There was a winter where Ren spent so much time at the estate that he had a room, and then he was there more often than not. And then one morning Kale woke up and Ren was already in the kitchen making tea badly and complaining about the kettle, and it was so ordinary and so good that he stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking. "You are staring," Ren said without turning around. "I am appreciating." "Same thing." "Not always." Ren turned. He held out a cup. The tea was slightly too strong. It always was. Kale had decided this was a permanent feature of the relationship and he was fine with it. He took the cup. He stood next to Ren in the kitchen in the morning light and drank the too strong tea. He thought about the plan he had made on the first morning. Be invisible, 'cause no drama, get a garden, exit the story as quietly as possible. He had the garden. The rest of it had not gone according to plan at all. He thought about the original Kale Doran, who had never sent the letter, who had died with it in his desk drawer, unsent. He thought about the part of himself that was still, in some ways, just a reader who had stumbled into the wrong body and tried to do right by it. He hoped, wherever the original soul was, that he knew. That someone had read the letter. That the gates had been opened. That the garden was growing. That in the end, even the villain got to be loved. Ren nudged his shoulder. "You are doing it again." "What?" "The thing where you go very quiet and very far away." He looked at him. "I was just thinking." "About what?" He considered how to answer that. "About how I came here wanting to disappear," he said finally, and ended up doing the opposite. Ren looked at him for a moment. Then he set his own cup down and said, "Are you unhappy about that?" He thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. "No," he said. "I think I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Ren smiled. "Just a small one." "Good," he said. And it was. The first thing I noticed was that my hands were too pretty. Not in a normal way. Like, aggressively, unfairly, suspiciously pretty. Long fingers, smooth skin nails, that looked like someone had paid money for them. I sat up slowly, looked around the room, and realized three things very fast. 1. This room was enormous, and way too fancy for someone like me. 2. The mirror across the room was showing me a face that was definitely not mine. 3. There was a sword on the wall, an actual sword, just hanging there like interior decoration. I got up carefully, walked to the mirror, and stared. The face looking back at me was beautiful in that sharp, cold way that villains in stories always are. High cheekbones, dark eyes, a mouth that looked like it had never smiled warmly at anyone in its life. I had read enough stories to know what this kind of face meant. This was a villain face. My name, as far as the memories flooding into my head could tell me, was Cassian Vore, second son of the powerful Vore family, twin brother of Dorian Vore, who was the actual villain of the novel I had apparently fallen into. A novel called The Emperor's Sword, which I had read twice and rated 4 out of 5 stars because the ending made me cry in a coffee shop. I knew this story. I knew exactly what happened to Cassian Vore. He was used by his twin brother as a decoy. He took the blame for things Dorian did, and in chapter 14 he was executed publicly, while Dorian watched from a balcony and did not even look sad about it. I sat back down on the very expensive bed and put my face in my hands. "Okay," I said to no one. "Okay, this is fine. This is completely fine." It was not fine. I had about 3 months before chapter 14. 3 months to figure out how to not get executed for crimes I did not commit, while also not attracting attention from anyone important in this story. The plan was simple. Stay quiet. Stay in my room. Let Dorian do his villain things without me anywhere nearby. Do not, under any circumstances, get involved with the male lead. The male lead of the Emperor's Sword was a man named Ezrin Holt, captain of the Imperial Guard. Tall, serious, loyal to a fault, and completely devoted to justice. In the novel, he was the one who eventually caught Dorian and stopped him. He was good and noble, and honestly a little boring, which is why I had given the novel 4 stars instead of 5. In the novel, Cassian and Ezrin had exactly 2 interactions. One where Ezrin arrested Cassian by mistake, and one where Ezrin realized the mistake, but it was too late, because Cassian was already sentenced. I was not going to let that happen. I had a plan. The plan lasted about 4 hours. I had decided to sneak out of the Vora estate to get a better sense of the city layout, because in the novel the city had 3 exits and I needed to know which one was least guarded. I wore a plain cloak over the fancy clothes, pulled the hood up, and felt very clever about the whole thing. Then I turned a corner near the market and walked directly into a fight. Not a small argument, an actual physical fight. 3 men in dark coats had someone pressed against the wall of an alley, and the someone was clearly losing. I should have walked away. Any smart person would have walked away, but the someone made a sound that was very obviously pain, and my legs made a decision my brain had not agreed to yet. I stepped in. I had never fought anyone in my actual life, but Cassian's body apparently had training, because my hands moved before I thought about it. I hit the first man hard enough to make him stumble. The second one turned on me, and I ducked without knowing I was going to. The third one ran. The first 2 looked at each other, looked at me, and ran after the third. I stood there breathing hard and looked at the person I had just rescued. He was tall, dark hair, the kind of face that looked serious even when it was surprised. He wore a captain's insignia on his coat. My brain went completely blank. Ezrin Holt looked at me for a long moment. "You just fought 3 armed men," he said. "I have no idea why," I said honestly. He almost smiled. Almost. "Are you hurt?" I looked at my hands. One of my knuckles was bleeding. A little. He reached into his coat, took out a cloth, and handed it to me. "You're Cassian Vore," he said. It was not a question. "Unfortunately," I said. He looked at me like that was a strange answer. It was a strange answer. But he did not walk away. He stood there while I wrapped my hand, and then he said, "I'll walk you back to the estate." This was already going wrong. 3 days after the alley incident, I had almost convinced myself it was not a big deal. Almost. The problem was that Ezrin Holt had walked me back to the estate, stood at the gate until I was safely inside, and then said, "Be careful," in a voice that sounded like he meant it. And that was somehow worse than anything else that had happened. In the novel, Ezrin never said anything kind to Cassian. He barely looked at him. But here he was, being careful and handing me cloth for my bleeding hand, and existing in ways the story had not prepared me for. I sat in the library, because Cassian apparently spent a lot of time there, and I was trying to be consistent, and opened a book I was not reading, and thought about what this meant. The answer I kept arriving at was, nothing good. If Ezrin started paying attention to me, that was a problem. The entire point of my survival plan was to be invisible, to be the Vore twin no one noticed. If the male lead of this story started treating me like a person instead of background furniture, things were going to get complicated very fast. "You look very unhappy for someone sitting in a comfortable chair," said a voice. I looked up. A boy about my age was standing in the doorway of the library, looking at me with open curiosity. He had a friendly face, and the kind of smile that made you want to trust him immediately. In the novel, I recognized him after a moment. This was Pel Oren, Ezrin's junior officer and the main source of comic relief in chapters 6 through 9. "I am not unhappy," I said. "I am thinking." "Those look the same on you," he said, walking in like I had invited him. "Also, I came to tell you that Captain Holt wants to know if you would be willing to make a statement about the incident in the market." "What incident?" I said, which was a stupid thing to say because there was only one incident. Pel gave me a look. "The 3 armed men you punched, One of them turns out to be connected to a smuggling ring the captain has been investigating. Your description of them would help." He paused. He could have sent a letter, but he asked me to come personally, which is, between you and me, very unusual behavior for him. I stared at the book I was not reading. "Tell him I will send a written account," I said. "He said you might say that," Pell said. "He also said to tell you that a written account is fine, but he would prefer to speak with you directly if possible." "Why?" I said. Pell shrugged in a way that suggested he had theories he was choosing not to share. "He is the captain. He does not always explain himself." He tilted his head. "You know, you are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, someone more like your brother." He said it lightly, but his eyes were watching me carefully. I was quiet for a moment. In the novel, Pell was good at reading people. That was actually why he was useful to Ezran. I had to be careful. "I am nothing like my brother," I said. That was true. Cassian Vore, the character, had been crushed and used by Dorian for years. I had no intention of being either of those things. Pell smiled. A real one this time. "Good," he said simply, and left. The next morning I wrote a very detailed account of the three men and sent it to the captain's office. I described their clothing, their height, the direction they ran. I was thorough, professional. I signed it Cassian Vore, second son of Vore, which felt extremely awkward, but was technically accurate. I thought that would be the end of it. Ezran showed up at the estate that evening. My brother Dorian was out, which was lucky, because Dorian's relationship with Ezran in the novel was hostile from the start, and I did not want to be in the room when those two were in the same space. I met Ezran in the front sitting room, which was decorated with uncomfortable-looking furniture that was clearly meant to impress rather than to be sat in. Ezran sat in the uncomfortable chair like it was perfectly normal. I sat across from him and tried not to look like I was panicking. "Your account was thorough," he said. "I tried to be helpful," I said. "The detail about the emblem on the third man's collar was particularly useful." He paused. "Most people would not notice that in the middle of a fight." "I notice things," I said carefully. He looked at me in that direct way he had, not aggressive, just very present, like he was actually paying attention. "You also stepped in to help someone you did not know, against three men who were armed. That is not a small thing to do." I looked at my hands. The knuckle had healed fast, which I suspected was one of the benefits of being in a fictional body with apparently good healing. "It seemed wrong not to," I said. Silence. Then, "Yes," he said quietly. Like that was an answer he had not expected but found satisfying. He asked a few more questions about the incident. I answered them honestly. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door, and we stood in the entrance hall for a moment in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which was somehow the most alarming thing that had happened so far. "You should not wander the market district alone," he said at the door, "particularly in the evenings." "Are you telling me to be careful again?" I said before I could stop myself. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Yes," he said. "I suppose I am." He left. I closed the door. I stood there for a full minute. This was bad. This was very, very bad. I was starting to like him, and we were only in part 2. I had been avoiding Dorian since I arrived in this story. This was not difficult, because Dorian was the kind of person who filled a room with his own sense of importance, and then left before anyone else could say anything. He was rarely home, and when he was, I hid in the library and read actual books instead of staring at them. But on the morning of my 14th day in this world, Dorian walked into my room without knocking. I knew it was him before I turned around. Same face as mine, technically, but worn differently. Where my expression apparently defaulted to quiet and a little sad, his was permanently set to a look that said he was calculating something. "Brother," he said pleasantly, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I said. "We do." He sat down in the chair by the window without being invited. In the novel, Dorian was charming in a surface way, the kind of charming that made you want to agree with him before you figured out you should not. "I heard you had a conversation with Ezran Holt." I kept my face still. He had questions about an incident I witnessed. "You witnessed," Dorian repeated, like he found the word funny. "I also heard you stepped into that incident, which is not like you, Cassian." That was the problem. It was not like Cassian. The real Cassian, the one from the novel, had spent years learning to disappear. He did not step into fights. He did not help strangers. He did not talk to the captain of the Imperial Guard. I was passing by, I said. It would have been strange to keep walking. Dorian looked at me for a moment. Then he smiled. Of course, he said warmly. I am glad you are becoming more engaged with the city. Actually, that is what I wanted to discuss. I have a task for you. And there it was. In the novel, this was the part where Dorian started using Cassian as a tool. He was going to ask me to deliver something, or meet someone, or be seen somewhere. Whatever it was, it would be designed to put Cassian in a position that could later be used as evidence against him. What kind of task? I said. Simple. He reached into his coat and placed a sealed letter on the table near me. Deliver this to a merchant named Aldous near the East Gate. That is all. No need to open it or ask questions. Just deliver and come home. I looked at the letter. In the novel, one of the things that got Cassian convicted was being seen meeting with people connected to Dorian's criminal network. He never knew what he was carrying. He was never told who these people were. I am busy this week, I said. Dorian blinked. That was not the answer he had prepared for. It will only take an hour. I said I am busy. Silence. Dorian looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. He was recalculating. I could see it happening. Cassian, he said, softer now. We are family. I am asking for one small thing. And I am saying no. I looked at him directly. If you need a delivery made, hire someone. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Dorian picked up the letter, put it back in his coat, and stood up. Of course, he said pleasantly. I understand. You are busy. He left. I sat very still and breathed. That was the first time anyone in this story had said no to Dorian Vori. I could tell by the way his face had gone very calm and very blank, which in people like him usually means they are genuinely angry but choosing not to show it. I had just made myself a target. The thought was not great, but the alternative was worse. I went to the library and stared at a book for a while. Then Pell showed up again, which I was beginning to suspect was just going to be his thing. You look even more unhappy than last time, he said cheerfully. Thank you, Pell, I said. That is very helpful. He sat across from me and dropped a small wrapped package on the table. From the captain. He said you mentioned your knuckle was slow to heal, so he sent something from the infirmary. I stared at the package. I said it was fine. He heard fine and decided to send medicine anyway. Pell propped his chin on his hand. He is like that. He notices things people say are fine and then quietly does something about them. It is very annoying, honestly. I once told him I was fine after a 12-hour patrol and woke up the next morning to find he had rescheduled my next shift. He paused. I did not complain. I picked up the package and held it. It was a small thing, just ointment from an infirmary, but it was such a specific kind of thoughtful that I had to work very hard to keep my expression neutral. He really needs to stop doing that, I said. Completely agree, Pell said, in a tone that suggested he agreed with the opposite. Oh, also, the captain was wondering if you might be interested in having dinner sometime this week, he said, and I am quoting him, that he would like to continue the conversation. What conversation? I said. He did not specify. Pell smiled. He rarely specifies. That is another annoying thing about him. I thought about Dorian's expression when I said no. I thought about the letter I had not delivered. I thought about chapter 14 and an execution I was trying very hard to avoid. And then, because I clearly had no survival instinct at all, I said, tell him Thursday works. Pell looked genuinely delighted. Excellent, he said, and stood up. I will tell him. Try not to look so terrified about it. I am not terrified, I said. You are a little terrified, he said kindly, and left. He was right. I was a little terrified. But it was the kind of terrified that also felt, underneath, very much like something else. I was not going to name that something else. Not yet. Let me be clear about something. I had read the novel. I knew exactly who Ezrin Holt was as a character. Serious, rule-following, devoted to the Empire with the kind of loyalty that sometimes crosses into stubbornness. In the novel he had about 40 pages of actual personality, and the rest of the time he was just being competent at things, which is admirable but not especially interesting. But the man sitting across from me at a very quiet table in a very good restaurant was considerably more complicated than 40 pages of competence. "You have not touched your food," he said. "I am thinking," I said. "You do that a lot." He said it without judgment, just as an observation. "Is that a problem?" "No." He picked up his own fork. "I find it interesting." I looked at him. "Most people find it off-putting. Most people are not very patient," he said simply. I did not have an answer for that, so I ate some of my dinner and tried to organize my thoughts. The thing about Ezrin that the novel had not prepared me for was that he asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. Not in a polite, half-listening way. In a way that made you feel like what you said was going somewhere and being kept. He had asked me, somewhere between the soup and the main course, what I thought of the city. Not a polite question. He had asked specifically what I noticed about it and why. And I had answered honestly, because Cassian's memories gave me context I could not have faked, and because Ezrin's expression when I started talking made it very hard to stop. "The East District has been changing," I said. "More private guards in the last 2 months. Less city patrol presence. Whatever is happening near the East Gate is being managed privately rather than officially, and that means someone with enough money to replace city services decided they wanted less oversight." Ezrin went very still. "What?" I said. "That is," he said carefully, "a very accurate observation. Is it connected to the men from the alley?" Silence. He looked at me in a way that was evaluating and something else that I could not quite name. "You should not ask questions like that," he said, not harshly, like he was saying it for my protection. "I know," I said, "but I notice things and sometimes they add up." He set down his fork. "Cajun," he said, and the way he said my name did something embarrassing to my chest. "There are people in this city who would be unhappy to hear you speaking like this." "I know that too. Then why are you saying it to me?" "Good question." The honest answer was that I trusted him in the way you trust a character who you have watched being good for an entire novel even when it cost him something. But I could not say that, so I said the second truest thing. "Because you are the only person I have met who listens like the answer matters." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right. Your brother sent you somewhere last week and you refused to go." He said it calmly. "How do you know about that?" I should have been surprised. I was not. "You have someone watching the estate." "I have someone watching your brother," he said. There was something in that distinction that he meant me to hear. "Not your brother and you, just your brother. Cassian, I need to know if you are involved in what Dorian is doing." And there it was. The question the story was built on. I looked at him across the table in a restaurant that had suddenly become very quiet in the way things go quiet when something important is happening. I thought about chapter 14. I thought about the letter I had not delivered. I thought about the way Ezrin had handed me a cloth for my bleeding hand, like it was the most natural thing. "No," I said. "I am not involved. I have been trying very hard not to be." He looked at me for a long time. "I believe you," he said. "Just like that?" "Just like that." He picked up his fork again. "Finish your dinner. You have barely eaten." I looked at my plate, then at him. "You are very strange for someone who is supposed to be strictly professional," I said. He almost smiled again. That almost smile was going to destroy me. "So I have been told." We finished dinner. He walked me back toward the estate district, even though it was out of his way. And when we stopped at the corner where our paths split, he said, "Be careful of your brother, and if anything happens, send for Pell. He will find me." "Why would you do that?" I asked. "Help me, I mean." He looked at me with that direct gaze. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said, and then, quieter, "and because I think you have been carrying too much alone for a long time." He walked away. I stood on the corner for a full 2 minutes. This man was going to be a serious problem. 3 weeks after the dinner I had decided was a one-time thing, Ezrin had eaten with me 4 more times. To be fair, 2 of those were accidental. One happened because we both ended up at the same tea house, and it would have been rude to leave. One happened because Pell engineered it very obviously, and then pretended he had not. I said nothing about that because Pell had also started bringing me information about the Eastgate situation in a way that was very casual and very clearly deliberate. I liked Pell. He was chaotic in a friendly way, like a helpful disaster. But the situation with Dorian was getting worse. He had tried twice more to get me to do things I was not going to do. Both times I refused. Both times he smiled pleasantly and left. That pleasant smile was more frightening than anger would have been. It meant he was adjusting his plan, and I did not know what the new plan looked like. The morning of day 31, I went to the library and found a note tucked into my usual book. No signature, just a date, a location, and the words, "Be there, or people you have spoken with recently will be implicated instead." I sat with the note for a long time. This was the divergence point. In the novel, this was where Cassian, faced with a threat to someone else, agreed to do what Dorian wanted. He went to the meeting. He was seen there. Everything after that moved fast toward chapter 14. I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket. Then I went to find Pell. He was in the training yard near the guard quarter, which was not where I would usually go, but I had learned that Pell was usually findable within 3 locations, and the training yard was one of them. He saw me coming, and his expression shifted immediately from relaxed to alert. "What happened?" he said. I handed him the note. He read it. His face did something complicated. "When and where is this?" "Tomorrow evening. An address near the East Gate. That is inside the area we have been watching." He looked up. "Does he know what you have told the captain?" "I do not think so, but he suspects something changed." I looked at my hands. "If I do not go, he said people I have spoken with will be implicated. I think he means Ezrin." Pell was quiet. Then, "I am going to take this to the captain now." "I know," I said. "That is why I brought it to you." Pell folded the note and tucked it away. He looked at me with an expression that was more serious than I had ever seen on his face. "You did the right thing," he said. "Whatever happens next, you did the right thing." I nodded. I felt very tired. The next part happened fast, the way bad things tend to. Ezrin came to see me that evening, not for dinner. He came to the estate directly, which had never happened before, and we sat in the uncomfortable front room, and he looked at me in a way that was different from before, more careful, more aware of something. "I read the note," he said. "I know, Cassian." He leaned forward slightly, and the shift was small but noticeable. "I need you to tell me everything you know about what your brother is doing. Not the things you have mentioned carefully. Everything." I looked at him. "If I do that, my brother will know I talked. He will make sure I am blamed for everything he has done. I will not let that happen." "You cannot promise that," I said. "You follow the law. If the evidence points to me, you will follow where it points." He was quiet. "Then, no," he said firmly. "I follow justice. Those are not always the same thing." He met my eyes. "I have been watching this case for 4 months. I know your brother's network. I know what he has built. I have also been watching you for 3 weeks, and I know the difference between you and him." Something in my chest was doing something I was going to firmly ignore. "And if you are wrong about me, I am not wrong about you," he said, simply, like it was a fact he had already verified. I told him everything. It took 2 hours. I told him every piece Cassian's memories held, everything I had noticed myself, everything Pell had quietly given me. I told him about the letter I had not delivered, and the note in my book, and the pleasant smile that scared me more than yelling would. Ezrin listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back and was quiet for a moment. "You have been building a case," he said. "I have been trying to survive," I said. "Both things can be true." He stood up. "I am going to that location tomorrow evening." "Not you. You are going to stay home and stay visible. Is that clear?" "You cannot order me around," I said. "I am asking," he said, which was somehow more effective than ordering. "Please. One word and I completely caved." "Fine," I said. "I will stay home." He nodded. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped and turned back, and for a moment he looked like he was going to say something that was not professional or official. He said, "Thank you for trusting me." I had no idea what to do with that, so I said, "Do not get hurt tomorrow." He looked at me for a moment. "I will try," he said, and left. I sat in the uncomfortable chair for a long time after he was gone. Everything was about to change. I could feel it. I stayed home. I want to be clear about that. I stayed home exactly as requested. I was visible. I had dinner in the main hall. I read in the library. I was, by any measure, a person who was not doing anything suspicious. Then at 9 in the evening, a servant came to the library and said there had been an incident near the East Gate and Captain Holt had been injured. I was out the door before the sentence was finished. I know. I said I would stay home. But staying home when Ezran was hurt was physically impossible, and I was not going to apologize for that. Pell met me outside. He had been running, which was not a good sign. He is okay, he said immediately, because he clearly knew what I was going to ask. He is okay. It is not serious. What happened? The meeting was a trap. Not for us. For your brother. Pell fell into step beside me as we moved toward the guardhouse. Someone else was at that location who was not supposed to be there. There was a confrontation. The captain got between them, and one of them had a knife. He got hit in the shoulder. I made a sound that I hoped did not reveal too much. He is asking for you, Pell said, in a very neutral voice that was not neutral at all. He is asking for me, I repeated. Specifically, he said, and again I am quoting, tell Kasian first. Pell was looking straight ahead, but I could see the edge of a smile. I thought that was worth noting. I did not say anything. I walked faster. Ezran was in a room at the guardhouse, sitting on a cot with his coat off and his shoulder bandaged. He looked pale in the way people look when they have lost more blood than is comfortable, but not enough to be truly frightening. When I came through the door, he looked up and something in his face settled. You came, he said. Of course I came, I said, and I sat down on the stool near the cot and looked at his shoulder with the kind of focus I needed to stay calm. Pell said it was not serious. It is not, he said. I have had worse. That is not comforting information. No, he admitted. I suppose not. I looked at him properly. He looked tired. Not just physically tired, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying something for a long time. Did you catch my brother? I asked. Not tonight. He shifted carefully. He was not at the location. Someone else was there instead. Someone who works for him. They were meeting with a third party we did not know about. He paused. It is more complicated than we thought. It is always more complicated than anyone thinks, I said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Yes. He looked at me. Are you all right? You are the one who was stabbed. I know, he said. I am asking about you anyway. I pressed my hands together in my lap and looked at them. I am fine, I said, which was Kasian's version of, I am managing but I do not know for how much longer. Kasian. His voice was quiet. Look at me. I looked at him. You have been handling this alone for a long time, he said, before you came to Pell. Before any of this. You figured out what your brother was doing and you said nothing and carried it alone. Why? I was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was complicated. The short answer was, because I did not think anyone would believe me over Dorian. Something shifted in his expression. It was not pity. It was something more complicated and more serious. I believe you, he said. I believed you before you showed me anything. I want you to understand that. I had been holding things tightly inside my chest for 31 days, and that sentence was a very inconvenient time for them to try to get out. I focused very hard on staying calm. Why? I said, which came out quieter than I meant. He reached out slowly and put his hand over mine on my knee, just held it there. Because you show up, he said. When it would be easier to look away, you do not. That tells me more than any report. I stared at his hand over mine. It was warm. I had not expected that. You are very different from how I expected, I said without thinking. How did you expect me? More. I stopped. More strictly official. More by the rules. I follow rules when they serve people, he said. When they do not, I follow the people. A pause. You are a person I want to follow, if that is not too strange a thing to say. It was an extremely strange thing to say, and also one of the most beautiful things anyone had ever said to me, and I was going to need a moment. It is a little strange, I said. I will accept that. He did not move his hand. We sat there for a while in the quiet guardhouse room. Outside, I could hear Pell pretending very loudly to be busy with paperwork. Pell was not subtle. He was lovable, but not subtle. Get some rest, I finally said. You should too, he said. He let go of my hand slowly. Kasian, whatever happens with Dorian, you will not be alone in it. I stood up. I needed to stand up before I did something I could not take back. Okay, I said. It was a small word, but I meant all of it. I left. Pell was waiting in the hallway, very innocently reviewing documents. Not a word, I said. I said nothing, he said cheerfully. You are thinking very loudly, I said. He grinned. I am just happy for my captain, he said. He has been professionally excellent for years. It is nice to see him be a person for a change. I walked past him before my face could do anything I did not want it to do. Outside, the air was cool, and I stood in it for a while. My hand was still warm where his had been. Chapter 14 felt very far away tonight. I was going to fight very hard to keep it that way. I had 1 week before the convergence point. In the novel, Chapter 14 happened at the end of month 3. I was now at month 3, week 3. I had changed enough things that the novel's exact timeline was probably different, but some things in stories have a shape that pulls events toward them no matter how much you push back. A story wants to finish itself, and this story had always been about a Vori twin taking the fall. I just needed to make sure it was the right one. The problem was Dorian knew something had shifted. I saw it in small ways. The servants reported to him more carefully when I was around. He started appearing in rooms I was using, not confrontationally, just present, watching. When he spoke to me, he was pleasant in that calculated way, but his eyes were doing something different than his mouth. On the morning of day 78, he came to breakfast. We never had breakfast together. This was new. I have been thinking, he said, pouring tea like we did this every day, about how little time we have spent together recently. We are brothers, Cassian. We should be closer. We have never been close, I said. He set down the teapot. No, he agreed. But that could change. He looked at me with something that almost looked sincere. Almost. I know I have not been good to you. I looked at him. I used you, he said, when we were younger. I used the fact that you were quiet and people overlooked you. I put things on you that were not yours to carry. He paused. I want to be better than that. In the novel, this was not in the story. Dorian never admitted anything. He never attempted this kind of conversation. Which meant this was not Dorian being honest. This was Dorian having figured out that his other tools were not working and reaching for a different one. What do you want? I said. He looked surprised, just for a moment, that I had gone straight to it. Then he smiled. A real one this time. The kind that meant I had done something he found interesting. I want your help, he said, genuinely. Not to carry things blindly, as a partner. In what? In what I have been building. He leaned forward. It is not what you think. The men near the East Gate, the network. It is not crime, Cassian. It is survival. The people in power in this empire are not kind to families like ours. I have been building something that ensures we are not subject to them. I listened to the whole speech. It was very good. In another version of me, in another version of this story, it might have worked. The part about families like ours, about survival, about power, those were real things, real problems, real fears. He was wrapping something real around something false, and it was skillfully done. And the people who have been hurt by what you have built? I asked. He paused. Just briefly. There is always cost. The man from the alley, I said. He was one of yours. He was shaking down a market seller who could not pay. That is not survival. That is what you are doing to survive being done to someone else. Silence. You have changed, Dorian said. Not pleasantly, just factually. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I was always like this and you never looked close enough to see it. He sat back. The pleasant expression was gone. I am going to ask you one more time, he said quietly. Stand with me or stand against me. There is no middle. Then I stand against you, I said, because the middle was never real. He stood up. For a moment, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger. Something sadder than anger. I did not want it to be like this, he said. I know, I said. I believe you. I still think you are wrong. He left. I sat at the breakfast table and breathed. Then I sent Pell a message. The meeting that afternoon with Ezrin and Pell was fast and serious. I told them what Dorian had said. Ezrin listened with his hands folded on the desk, expression very still. He is going to move soon. Ezrin said. He knows we are watching him. He was testing you to see if you could be turned. He will not be patient anymore, I agreed. He will want to act before you have enough to hold him, which means he will try to use you, Pell said, even without your agreement. He will create evidence. I know. I looked at Ezrin. There is something I did not tell you before. I was afraid of how it would look. I paused. There is a letter. Dorian left a copy of something in my room 3 weeks ago. I do not know if it was deliberate or a mistake, but it connects me to one of his early operations. It was before I arrived, before I refused him, but on paper it will not look like that. Ezrin looked at me carefully. You have been holding this for 3 weeks. I did not know if telling you would make things worse. Show me, he said. I showed him. Pell took the letter and examined it. Ezrin read it twice. Then he sat back and looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. Thank you for showing me this now, he said. You are not going to ask why I waited? No, he said, because I understand why you waited. You were not sure how much to trust me. A pause. Do you trust me now? Yes, I said, simply, because it was true. He nodded. Something in his eyes was warm in a way his expression did not fully show. Then let me handle this. All of it. You have been carrying this for too long. Ezrin, I said, and the name came out softer than I intended. Be careful. Dorian knows you are close. He is not going to come at you through the front. He looked at me. I know. I am serious, I said. He is going to do something that looks like it is about the case but is actually about you. A pause. You are worried about me, he said. Not like a question. Obviously, I said, which came out with more feeling than I was prepared for. Pell made a small sound. I looked at him. He was examining the ceiling with great interest. Pell, I said. Yes, he said serenely. I need you to look literally anywhere except at me right now. I am looking at the ceiling, he said. Ezrin was not looking at the ceiling. He was looking at me with that expression that was almost a smile, and also something deeper that I had no word for yet. I will be careful, he said quietly. I was going to need chapter 14 to be over soon, because I was running out of ways to keep my feelings from becoming very obvious. The night Dorian made his move, I was ready. I will not pretend I knew exactly how it would happen, but I had spent enough time in this story to feel its shape, and the shape was pulling everything toward this night with the kind of momentum that you either run from or turn around and face. I chose to face it. Dorian's plan was elegant in a terrible way. He had arranged for documents to be found in my room, documents that connected me to his network in a way that was detailed and looked very real. He had also arranged for a witness, someone who would testify to seeing me at a meeting I had never attended, and he had timed all of it for the morning after a public event where he would be visibly in another part of the city. He had not counted on 2 things. The first was that Pell had been quiet and careful and very good at his job for 3 months, and Pell had found the witness 2 days before and learned, through means I did not ask about in detail, that the witness had been paid. The second was that Ezrin had spent the last 3 weeks building a case that was not about me at all. It was entirely about Dorian, and it was done. The arrest happened in the early morning. I was not there because Ezrin had firmly and clearly told me not to be there, and I had agreed because I was genuinely trying to stop making solo decisions that gave people heart attacks. Pell described it to me afterward. Dorian had been calm, apparently. Polite, even. He had asked which of the charges were being laid. He had listened to the list. Then he had looked at the arresting officers and said, "Where is my brother?" "Not here," Pell had told him. And Dorian had gone quiet. I heard this and felt something complicated. Not satisfaction, not relief exactly. Something more like grief at the edge of relief. Dorian was terrible. He had done genuinely harmful things to real people. He had spent years treating me as a tool. But he was also, in his way, someone who had been afraid and had chosen a very bad way of dealing with it. I did not forgive him, but I understood something about him that I had not expected to understand. I told Ezrin this, later, sitting across from him in the tea house that had become something close to our place. He listened to all of it without interrupting. "Does it make it harder?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It does not make him right, but it makes it harder." "That is how it should be," he said. "It is easy to dismiss people who hurt you if they are purely evil. It is harder when they are also real. I looked at my tea. You are surprisingly wise for someone who spent most of this story giving me concerned looks and showing up when I did not ask you to. You never asked, but you always needed it, he said, not unkindly. You do not know that. I know that you helped a stranger in an alley when it was easier not to. I know you refused your brother 3 times when it would have been safer to comply. I know you brought me information that could have been used against you because you thought it was the right thing to do. He paused. I know that every time I have shown up when you did not ask, you looked less alone afterward. I stared at my tea very hard. Kasian, he said. I am listening, I said, to the tea. Look at me. I looked up. He was close. We were at a small table, and he was leaning forward slightly, and his eyes were very direct and warm in the way they always were, but now with something else underneath, something that had been building since an alley, and a cloth for a bleeding hand, and 4 months of meals, and conversations, and Pell making moderately obvious interventions. I would like to say something, he said, and I would like you to let me finish before you find a way to redirect the conversation. I do not redirect conversations, I said. You absolutely redirect conversations, he said. You are very good at it, I have noticed. I closed my mouth. I have been watching you for 4 months, he said. At first because it was my job, then because I wanted to, then because I could not imagine not doing it. He looked at me steadily. You are the most careful, most stubborn, most quietly brave person I have ever met. You came into a situation that was designed to destroy you, and you refused to be destroyed. I do not know how to not be in your life now. I have tried to think about it, and I cannot find a version of my days that makes sense without you in them. The tea house was very quiet. That is, I said, and then stopped. Too much? He asked. There was something behind his steady expression that was, I realized, a little nervous. Ezrin Holt, steady and serious and competent, was a little nervous. That made me feel something so warm I almost could not hold it. No, I said. It is not too much. It is... I stopped again. I woke up in a story that was supposed to end badly for me, and then you kept showing up. You were not supposed to save me. The story was not written that way. You were supposed to be on the other side of this. And yet, he said. And yet, I agreed. You kept saving the wrong brother. Something crossed his face. Then he laughed. A real one. Not the almost smile. An actual laugh, low and warm. And it changed his entire face into something that was not serious at all, just human and real and impossibly good to look at. I saved exactly the right brother, he said. I thought about chapter 14, about an execution that had not happened, about a story I had walked into knowing how it ended, and somehow written a different ending into it. Pell is going to be so smug about this, I said. Pell has been smug about this since week 2, Ezrin said. He told me, and I am quoting him, that I had the face of someone who had already made up his mind and was just waiting for paperwork. I laughed, actually laughed. It surprised me. That sounds exactly like him. He was not wrong, Ezrin said. He reached across the small table and put his hand over mine the same way he had in the guardhouse room, but not the same way at all. More certain this time. More like something decided. Is this all right? I turned my hand over under his so our palms were together. Yes, I said. He looked at me like he had found something he had been looking for without knowing he was looking. Good, he said. Outside the tea house, the city was loud and alive and going about its business with no idea that a story had just finished and started in the same moment. Somewhere across the city, Dorian Vore was in a room where the consequences of his choices were catching up to him. Somewhere nearby, Pell was probably already composing a very smug speech for later. And I was sitting in a tea house holding the hand of a man who had saved me when the story said he should not, and feeling, for the first time since I had woken up in a body that was not mine, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had come into this story as the one who was meant to fall. I was leaving it, instead, as someone who had been found. The last thing Wei Jian remembered from his real life was this: a half-eaten cup of instant noodles, a phone screen glowing at 2 a.m., and the final chapter of the web novel, Flame and Frost, loading way too slowly. Then the ceiling fan fell, directly onto his head. He woke up in a body that was not his, wearing robes that cost more than his entire apartment, lying on a bed so soft it felt like a cloud had personally apologized to him. "Young master, you are awake." Wei Jian stared at the ceiling of an unfamiliar room, stone walls, silk curtains, a nervous servant hovering beside him, with the expression of someone who expected to be slapped at any moment. Right, he was inside. Flame and the Frost. Now in the body he had taken over, Ren Yufei, the villain, the cold, arrogant young lord who spent the first 15 chapters of the novel making the male leads' lives miserable before getting publicly humiliated, stripped of his title, and then, in a very dramatic fashion, falling off a cliff. Great. Wonderful. Very exciting. Wei Jian sat up slowly and looked around the room. He needed to think. He had read the whole novel. He knew every plot point, every character, every terrible thing Ren Yufei was supposed to do, and he had exactly zero interest in doing any of it. His goals were simple. 1. Do not fall off a cliff. 2. Collect as much money as possible. 3. Find a quiet town somewhere far from the main story, buy a small house, grow vegetables, and live peacefully until this whole transmigration situation sorted itself out. He would not go near the male lead, Shen Liuhe, the ice-cold sword cultivator who was technically Ren Yufei's sworn rival. He would not go near the second male lead, Xiao Chengyu, the cheerful merchant prince who showed up in Chapter 7 and caused half the plot's chaos. He would avoid all of them. He would be a ghost, a very rich ghost. He called for the servant, whose name turned out to be Doufu. Doufu was 17, terrified of everything, and had the biggest eyes Wei Jian had ever seen on a human being. "How much money do I have?" Wei Jian asked. Doufu blinked. "My lord?" "Money. Gold, silver, coins. How much?" Doufu told him. Wei Jian let out a very long breath. Ren Yufei was rich. Disgustingly, offensively, completely undeservedly rich. The estate alone was worth more than Wei Jian's entire neighborhood back home. Okay, so step 1 was already handled. He spent the next 2 days quietly reading through Ren Yufei's personal records and planning his escape from the story. He sold 3 unnecessary properties. He reorganized the household finances. He ate extremely good food and slept for 12 hours, because he deserved it, after dying via ceiling fan. He was completely calm, completely in control. Then, on the 3rd day, someone knocked on his study door and walked in without waiting for an answer. Wei Jian looked up from his accounts. The person standing in his doorway was tall, dressed in white robes with silver trim, with dark eyes that looked like they had personally seen and judged every sin in the universe. His expression was carved from something colder than ice. He had the face of someone drawn by an artist who was showing off. Shen Liuhe, the male lead. In Ren Yufei's personal study. "You look different," Shen Liuhe said. His voice was low and flat. He studied Wei Jian the way you study a math problem you already know the answer to. Wei Jian's brain did several things at once. It remembered every scene between Ren Yufei and Shen Liuhe. It remembered that in the novel, this meeting resulted in a screaming match and Ren Yufei throwing a very expensive vase. It remembered that Shen Liuhe was supposed to be the hero of this story, cold and untouchable and brilliant, and that he and Ren Yufei hated each other with the passion of 2 people who had never once spoken like adults. Wei Jian put down his pen. "I've been unwell," he said, in the most neutral voice he could manage. Shen Liuhe stared at him for a long moment. Something flickered in his expression, confusion maybe, or suspicion. "You called off the harassment of the Shen estate merchants," he said. "All 3 orders, reversed." "Oh, right." Wei Jian had done that. Ren Yufei had apparently been running some kind of petty economic war against the Shen family's trade routes, and Wei Jian had cancelled the whole thing because it seemed exhausting and pointless. "It was a waste of resources," Wei Jian said honestly. The silence in the room was so heavy it had weight. Shen Liuhe looked at him for another 5 seconds. Then, without a word, He turned and walked out. Wei Jian stared at the empty doorway. That went fine, he told himself. Dou Fu, who had been hiding behind a bookshelf the whole time, slowly emerged. My lord, he whispered, young Master Shen has never left a room without saying something cutting. Not once in 7 years. Wei Jian picked up his pen again. Good, he said. I prefer quiet. He ignored the fact that Shen Liuhe had looked back at him once. Just once, right before stepping through the door. He also ignored the way his own heart had done something very inconvenient in his chest. He had vegetables to plan for. He had a cliff to avoid. He did not have time for this. 3 weeks into his very careful, very sensible plan to avoid the plot entirely, Wei Jian went to the capital city to liquidate a property and accidentally walked into a festival. Not a small quiet festival, a massive, chaotic, flower and lantern festival that filled every street in the capital like someone had tipped over a box of celebration and left it to spread. He had not known about this festival. It was not in the novel. Apparently minor background events were not important enough for the author to write down, which, fair, honestly, but also extremely inconvenient right now. Wei Jian stood in the middle of the main street and watched thousands of people push past him in silk and embroidered cloth and flower crowns. Paper lanterns floated overhead. Someone nearby was selling skewers of candied fruit. A group of children ran between his legs, chasing a paper butterfly. You look lost, said a voice beside him. Wei Jian turned. The person next to him was leaning against a market stall with the casual ease of someone who had never experienced stress in their entire life. He was dressed in deep blue merchant robes with gold embroidery, wearing a smile that looked like it had been installed on his face at birth and never once removed. His hair was half tied up. He had a skewer of candied fruit in one hand, and he was absolutely, completely, obviously Xiao Chengyu. The second male lead. The cheerful disaster merchant prince who caused chaos in every chapter he appeared in. Not because he was mean, but because things just sort of happened around him. Like the universe had decided he needed to be at the center of every interesting situation. Wei Jian's eye twitched. I am not lost, he said stiffly. I am simply assessing the environment. Xiao Chengyu tilted his head. You're Ren Yufei, he said. Not a question. A statement, accompanied by frank curiosity. What are you doing at a public festival? Alone? Without anyone to intimidate? I am here on business. The property auction isn't until tomorrow morning. Xiao Chengyu said this so casually, so matter-of-factly, that Wei Jian stared at him. How do you know about the auction? I'm buying the property next to yours. He offered the candied fruit skewer. Want one? The vendor 3 stalls down is better, but this one has better plum flavor. Wei Jian stared at the offered skewer. In the novel, Ren Yufei's first interaction with Xiao Chengyu involved throwing a cup of tea at him and accusing him of spying. It was a whole thing. There was a very dramatic confrontation in a tea house. It took 2 chapters. Wei Jian took the candied fruit. It was good, really good. The plum flavor was exactly as described. Xiao Chengyu watched him eat it with an expression of absolute delight, like he had personally achieved something great. You're different, he said, which was becoming a concerning pattern. First Shen Liuhe, now him. Was it that obvious? People change, Wei Jian said neutrally. Ren Yufei doesn't change. He's been the same since he was 12. Xiao Chengyu said this with no particular judgment, just observation. Then he tilted his head again. Did something happen to you? I was unwell. You keep saying that. He paused. You cancelled the trade route harassment. Wei Jian sighed. Also yes. That was hurting about 300 families across the southern provinces. Xiao Chengyu's voice was still light, but his eyes were different now. Careful, watching. Those families have been doing better these past 3 weeks. Wei Jian looked at him. Good, he said simply. That was the point. The silence between them was different from the silence with Shen Liuhe. Shen Liuhe's silence had been cold and sharp. This one was warm and strange, like Xiao Chengyu was quietly recalculating something. Then the crowd surged around a corner, and a large group of festival-goers suddenly pushed between them, and Wei Jian grabbed onto the nearest stall post to avoid being carried away. When the crowd cleared, Xiao Chengyu was standing very close. close enough that Wei Jian could see the tiny gold flecks in his eyes. "You should stay for the lantern lighting," Xiao Chengyu said. His voice was softer now. "It's the best part. I have accounts to review." "Everyone has accounts to review. The accounts will still be there tomorrow," he smiled. "Stay." It was such a simple word, said so simply, without pressure, without expectation, just an invitation. Wei Jian should have said no. He stayed. They walked through the festival for 2 hours, and Xiao Chengyu talked the entire time. About the vendors, about the city politics, about a trade deal he was negotiating, about a terrible joke he had heard that morning. He talked like breathing, easy and constant, and Wei Jian found himself listening without meaning to. When the lanterns were released into the night sky, hundreds of warm orange lights rising over the capital, Xiao Chengyu stood beside him and said nothing at all. That was somehow worse than all the talking. Wei Jian looked at the lanterns. He did not look at Xiao Chengyu. He absolutely did not notice the way the lantern light fell on his face. He went home that night and stared at his accounts and thought about vegetables. The vegetables were not very comforting. Wei Jian was starting to think the universe was personally against him. He had a list of places Shen Liuhe should not be. The list was very long. It included the Eastern Market, the Ren Estate Library, the tea house on Silk Street, the Southern Bridge at dawn, and the very specific quiet garden in the estate where Wei Jian went every morning to think about vegetables. Shen Liuhe had now appeared in every single one of those locations. It was week 5. Wei Jian was beginning to lose his mind. "Why?" he asked Doufu one morning, as he looked out the window to see Shen Liuhe standing in his garden like he had always been there. "Is he in my garden again?" Doufu looked nervous. He said he was passing through. "This garden does not lead anywhere. It is enclosed on all 4 sides." "Yes, my lord." "So he is not passing through. He is simply standing there." "Yes, my lord." Wei Jian pressed his fingers to his temples. In the novel, Shen Liuhe avoided Ren Yufei as much as Ren Yufei avoided him. They only met when the plot forced them to confrontations, competitions, dramatic sword point conversations. They did not just quietly coexist in the same spaces. That was not a thing that happened. And yet, he went down to the garden because ignoring the male lead entirely seemed like it might cause a different kind of problem. Shen Liuhe was standing near the small pond, looking at the water. He didn't turn around when Wei Jian approached, which was either very rude or very comfortable, depending on how you looked at it. "You are in my garden," Wei Jian said. "Yes," Shen Liuhe agreed. "This is the 3rd time this week." "Yes." "Do you plan to explain why?" A pause. Shen Liuhe turned. His expression was unreadable, but something at the edge of it was uncertain, which was strange. In the novel, Shen Liuhe was never uncertain. He was always correct, always composed, always the most competent person in every room. "You told the city guard to release the detained merchants from Wuling district," he said. "They were wrongly detained," Wei Jian said. Previous Ren Yufei, he himself had ordered it, had created a false tariff violation case. I corrected it. "Those merchants trade through Shen family territory. I know. You had no reason to help them." Wei Jian looked at him. "They were innocent people sitting in a cell. I had every reason." The uncertainty in Shen Liuhe's expression deepened. It was like watching someone try to solve an equation where the answer kept coming out wrong. "You are not what I expected," Shen Liuhe said, very quietly. "People change," Wei Jian said, for probably the 5th time since arriving in this world. "Not like this." Shen Liuhe studied him. "Not this completely. Not this fast." Wei Jian said nothing. There was not a lot he could say without accidentally revealing that he was, in fact, a transmigrated college student who had died over noodles. The silence stretched between them. A bird called somewhere in the garden. The pond reflected the morning sky. "The Shen estate will be hosting a trade summit next month," Shen Liuhe said finally. "Your presence would be useful." Wei Jian blinked. "You are inviting me?" "I am stating that your presence would be useful." Shen Liuhe's voice was back to its usual even flatness. "You may interpret that how you like." He left. Wei Jian stood next to the pond for a long time after that. An invitation from Shen Liuhe. In the novel, Ren Yufei had gate-crashed the Shen summit uninvited and caused 3 separate scenes. He had not been quietly, calmly, almost shyly invited. Something was shifting. Wei Jian could feel it, like the plot bending around him in ways it was not supposed to. He went back inside, sat down at his desk, and wrote 2 letters. One to decline 4 social engagements he did not want to attend. One accepting the summit invitation because refusing would probably cause more problems. He was doing this for practical reasons, political reasons, trade reasons. He was not doing it because Shen Liuhe had looked at him like he was something worth figuring out. He absolutely was not. He was a little bit. The Shen estate was exactly as the novel described it. Enormous, white, full of sword cultivators, who walked like they were always prepared to fight someone, and cold, in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Wei Jian arrived with Doufu and 2 guards he had hired, specifically because they had no connection to Ren Yufei's old schemes, and therefore no reason to do anything suspicious. The summit was attended by about 40 powerful families. Wei Jian spent the first 2 hours being excessively polite to everyone, and watching people stare at him like he had grown a second head. Apparently, Ren Yufei's reputation was bad enough that basic politeness read as threatening. Xiao Chengyu appeared at his elbow at the mid-morning tea break. "You're being so normal," he said, sounding personally offended. "Do you know how boring that is? Everyone was expecting drama." "I am not here for drama," Wei Jian said. "That's the most dramatic thing you could have said." Xiao Chengyu handed him a cup of tea. "Shen Liuhe keeps looking at you." "He does not." "He does. He's done it 14 times since you arrived. I counted." Wei Jian looked up. Across the main hall, Shen Liuhe was standing with a group of family heads. He was not looking at Wei Jian. He was looking away very deliberately, which, in its own way, was also looking. Wei Jian drank his tea. The afternoon session was a trade negotiation between 6 families over a river route. Wei Jian had done his research. He had the numbers when an elder from the Zhao family proposed a toll system that would disadvantage the smaller southern merchants. Wei Jian quietly and precisely explained why it would destabilize the whole regional economy in about 2 years. The room went silent. Shen Liuhe, who was chairing the session, looked at him for a long moment. "That is correct," Shen Liuhe said. "The Zhao elder was overruled." Xiao Chengyu leaned over from Wei Jian's left. "Did you just do economic analysis in the middle of a political summit?" "Someone had to," Wei Jian said. "I'm a little bit in love with you right now," Xiao Chengyu said, very pleasantly. Wei Jian choked on air. The scandal happened in the evening, which Wei Jian had not planned for and could not have predicted. A minor lord from the north had arrived drunk, started making accusations about trade fraud, pointed at Wei Jian specifically, and then tripped over a table and knocked an entire display of flower arrangements directly onto Wei Jian and Shen Liuhe, who were unfortunately standing next to each other. In the chaos of falling flowers and shouting guests, someone grabbed Wei Jian's hand. He looked down. Shen Liuhe's hand, around his, gripped steady and warm, pulling him to the side before a falling decorative urn could hit his shoulder. The urn crashed where Wei Jian had been standing. The room was still loud and chaotic. Nobody was looking at them specifically. Shen Liuhe had probably just been moving him out of danger, automatically, without thinking. Except he had not let go. They stood there for approximately 4 seconds, which is a very long time when someone is holding your hand, and Wei Jian's brain had officially stopped working. Shen Liuhe seemed to realize it at the same moment. He released Wei Jian's hand. His expression was perfectly composed, but the very tips of his ears had gone slightly pink. "You were in the way of the urn," he said. "Yes," Wei Jian agreed. "That is all." "Of course." They both looked straight ahead at the chaos of the room. Xiao Chengyu materialized from somewhere to Wei Jian's right with the expression of someone who had seen everything and was going to remember it forever. "I counted," he said softly, that lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Shut up," Wei Jian said. Xiao Chengyu smiled like the sunrise. That night, alone in the guest room Shen Liuhe had provided, Wei Jian stared at the ceiling and had a very serious conversation with himself. The conversation went like this. "You are transmigrated. This is not your world. These people are characters in a story. You have a plan. The plan is vegetables and a small house. The plan does not include feelings. The plan definitely does not include whatever is happening with your heart right now. His heart did not respond to logic. Somewhere in the estate, a night bird was singing. Wei Jian pulled a pillow over his face. This was a problem. He tried. He genuinely tried. He went back to the Ren estate. He reorganized his accounts. He donated a frankly unreasonable amount of money to 3 rural schools because it seemed like a good thing to do, and also because Ren Yufei's original wealth came from methods that made Wei Jian uncomfortable. He began drafting plans for a small property in the southern hills, somewhere quiet, somewhere with good soil for a garden. He did not think about Shen Liuhe's hand. He did not think about the way Xiao Chengyu had looked at him across the festival lanterns. He was fine. He was absolutely, completely not at all fine. On a Tuesday, or what passed for Tuesday in this world, Doufu came running in with the expression of someone delivering both good and terrible news at once. "My lord," Doufu said, slightly out of breath. "Young Master Shen and young Master Xiao are both here." Wei Jian put down his pen. "At the same time." "At the same time, yes, my lord. They arrived from different directions and are currently standing in the entrance hall, sir, being very polite to each other in the way that actually means they are not being polite at all." Wei Jian walked to the entrance hall. Shen Liuhe and Xiao Chengyu were indeed both there. Shen Liuhe stood on the left, face blank, posture rigid. Xiao Chengyu stood on the right, smiling, but the smile had the particular quality of a smile used in place of something sharper. They both turned to look at Wei Jian the moment he appeared. "I came to discuss the summit follow-up," Shen Liuhe said. "I came to talk about the Southern Merchant Coalition," Xiao Chengyu said, at exactly the same moment. The two of them looked at each other. Wei Jian looked at both of them. Then he looked at Doufu. Doufu mouthed, "I am sorry, my lord." "Come in," Wei Jian said, because there was no alternative. "Both of you, we can discuss everything together." What followed was the most exhausting meeting of Wei Jian's transmigrated life. It was not that either Shen Liuhe or Xiao Chengyu was difficult, exactly. They were both professional. They were both focused on legitimate topics. They also disagreed on almost every point in the gentlest, most polite, most absolutely immovable way possible, and they kept directing their points at Wei Jian specifically, as if he was the deciding vote in a competition he had not entered. By hour 2, Wei Jian had resolved 4 trade disputes, rewritten a contract clause, and was strongly reconsidering his plan to stay in this world at all. "Can we agree," he said, during a brief silence, "on the river toll structure? Xiao Chengyu's model, with Shen Liuhe's proposed safeguards for the northern routes. Both parties benefit." They both looked at him. "Yes," Shen Liuhe said. "Fine by me," Xiao Chengyu said, sounding almost surprised. "Good." Wei Jian poured himself tea. "Is there anything else?" There was a pause. "You're very good at this," Xiao Chengyu said. He sounded genuinely impressed. "Mediating, organizing. You dissolved a conflict that's been running for 3 months in about 2 hours." "The conflict was not complicated," Wei Jian said. "Both parties wanted the same thing. They were just approaching it from opposite angles." Shen Liuhe was looking at him again with that expression. The one Wei Jian had started calling the recalculating expression. "You could do significant good," Shen Liuhe said, "with the Ren Estate's resources and your current approach." "I plan to," Wei Jian said honestly. Another pause. "What are you doing for dinner?" Xiao Chengyu asked. Shen Liuhe's gaze snapped to him. "That question," Shen Liuhe said, "was not part of the agenda." "I don't have an agenda," Xiao Chengyu said pleasantly. "I'm just hungry, and the food at the Ren Estate smells excellent." Wei Jian looked between the two of them, the cold, precise cultivation master and the bright, chaotic merchant prince, and thought about his small house in the southern hills. "Stay for dinner," he said. "Both of you. We can finalize the documentation." Xiao Chengyu looked triumphant. Shen Liuhe looked like he had not decided whether to be annoyed or not. Doufu, from the doorway, made a face that said, "My lord, I will need to prepare more food." The dinner was actually, surprisingly, genuinely pleasant. Xiao Chengyu told terrible jokes. Shen Liuhe critiqued every single one of them with surgical precision, which was somehow funnier than the jokes themselves. Wei Jian found himself laughing at the argument more than anything else. A real laugh, unplanned, the kind that comes out before you can stop it. Both of them looked at him when he laughed. Neither of them said anything. But they both stayed until the candles burned low. The letter arrived on a gray morning in the 6th week. It was addressed to Wei Jian in handwriting he did not recognize, sealed with a mark he did not know, and the contents were brief and alarming. We know what happened to the real Ren Yufei. Come alone to the old mill north of the city before the new moon. Do not involve the Shen or Xiao families. If you do, the information becomes public. Wei Jian read it 3 times. Then he sat very still for a very long time. Someone knew, or suspected, or was bluffing with a very educated guess. He did not know which, but all 3 options were bad. He put the letter in his desk drawer, canceled his afternoon plans, and spent 2 hours thinking. The real Ren Yufei was presumably gone. Wei Jian had arrived in this body, and the original soul had not been present. He did not know what that meant, and he had been carefully not thinking about it. The body was alive. The memories, patchy emotional flashes, nothing clear, were available to him. Whatever had happened to Ren Yufei before him was not something he could fix, but someone out there was treating it as leverage. He did not want to go to a secluded mill alone. That was how people died in stories. He had read enough novels to know that. He also could not tell Shen Liuhe or Xiao Chengyu. The letter specifically warned against it, and more practically, what would he even say? Hello, I am not actually Ren Yufei. I am a college student who was killed by a ceiling fan. Please advise? He went to the mill. He was not reckless about it. He told Dofu where he was going and when he expected to return. He brought a small blade hidden in his sleeve. He had been quietly practicing with it for weeks, because a defenseless villain body seemed like a very bad idea. He arrived early and checked the area before going inside. There was one person waiting, a woman in plain clothes, maybe 40, with the posture of someone who had worked very hard physical jobs her whole life and was not apologetic about it. Her name, she told him immediately, was Madame Fei. She had been Ren Yufei's private tutor when he was young, before the young lord's father had dismissed her, before everything had gone wrong. He was not always what he became, she said, looking at Wei Jian with an expression that was grieving something old. The boy I taught was curious, kind. He asked questions about everything. She paused. You remind me of him. Wei Jian said nothing. Whatever happened, Madame Fei said, however you came to be in that body, I think it might be that the universe gave him a second chance. Through you. She looked at him steadily. I am not here to expose you. I am here to warn you. There are people who knew the old Ren Yufei's plans he made before you arrived. They will move forward with those plans, expecting you to be who you were. If you are not prepared, you will be caught in them. She told him what the plans were. Wei Jian listened. They were bad, worse than bad. The original Ren Yufei had been planning to destabilize 3 provinces' trade routes, plant evidence to implicate the Shen family in fraud, and use the resulting chaos to consolidate power. The schemes were already in motion, arranged by people who had served Ren Yufei loyally for years. If Wei Jian did not stop them, they would unfold. People would be hurt. The Shen family, Shen Liuhe, would be hurt. Xiao Chengyu's merchant coalition would be destroyed. He rode back to the estate with the afternoon sky going orange over the hills, and he understood, sitting in the saddle with the wind cold on his face, that his plan had just changed. He could not go to the south and grow vegetables, not yet. Not until he had dismantled every scheme the original Ren Yufei had set in motion. That was going to require help. Specifically, it was going to require trusting 2 people he had been very carefully trying not to get close to. He arrived home, walked into his study, sat at his desk, and wrote 2 letters. One to Shen Liuhe, one to Xiao Chengyu. I need to tell you something. It will sound unbelievable. I am going to tell you anyway, because the alternative is worse. Please come. He sealed them. He handed them to Dofu. He sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling and thought, this is it. This is the part where everything either gets better or completely falls apart. Dofu hovered in the doorway. My lord, are you all right? I have no idea, Wei Jian said honestly. Dofu nodded with the wisdom of someone who had long accepted that their employer was entirely beyond prediction. Shall I bring tea? Yes, Wei Jian said. A lot of it. They came the next evening. Shen Liuhe arrived first, exactly on time, because of course he did. Xiao Chengyu arrived 2 minutes later, slightly out of breath, which suggested he had hurried, which suggested the letter had worried him, which Wei Jian filed away and tried not to think about too much. They sat across from Wei Jian in the study, and they both looked at him with different versions of careful attention, and Wei Jian thought, I have prepared for this. I know what I want to say. I have planned it. He had not planned for how hard it would be to actually say it. What I am about to tell you, he began, is going to sound like I have lost my mind. I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Xiao Chengyu nodded. Shen Liuhe said nothing, which was his version of agreement. Wei Jian told them everything, not just the schemes, everything, where he had actually come from, what had happened to him, what he remembered of the original Ren Yufei and what he did not, the novel, the plot he had been trying to avoid, the ceiling fan, all of it. He spoke for a long time, looking at the desk, and when he finally stopped talking and looked up, both of them were very still. Xiao Chengyu's expression had done several things during the explanation: surprise, disbelief, something softer and more complicated, and finally something that looked a lot like understanding. Shen Liuhe's expression had not changed at all during the entire thing, but his hands, resting on his knees, were very slightly not relaxed. The silence was long. So, Xiao Chengyu said finally, you're from another world. You died. You woke up in this body. And your entire plan was to collect money and move to the countryside. Yes, Wei Jian said. That is, Xiao Chengyu said, the most heartbreaking and also somehow funniest thing I have ever heard. Wei Jian exhaled. The schemes, Shen Liuhe said. His voice was very quiet. How long to dismantle them? Wei Jian blinked. That's your first question? The information about your origin is significant, Shen Liuhe said, but it does not change the immediate problem. How long? 3 months, maybe 4, if we work together. Some of the arrangements are buried in the estate's accounting records. Others are through proxies I need to identify. Shen Liuhe nodded. Tell me what you need. Just like that. No interrogation, no disbelief, no drama. Just tell me what you need. Something cracked open quietly in Wei Jian's chest. Xiao Chengyu leaned forward. I want to say something, and I want you to actually hear it. He looked at Wei Jian directly, with none of his usual brightness masking the seriousness underneath it. You've been here 2 months. You've reversed every harm you could find. You've helped people you had no reason to help. You've been honest with us right now when you could have just dealt with this alone. He paused. Whatever you are, wherever you came from, what you've done here is real, and it matters. Wei Jian looked at him. He was not prepared for that. He had prepared for doubt. He had prepared for suspicion. He had not prepared for someone looking at him with complete conviction and telling him that he mattered. He looked at Shen Liuhe. Shen Liuhe was watching him with the brain. Recalculating. Expression then, slowly, it resolved into something else, something quieter. You were planning to leave, Shen Liuhe said. It was not quite a question. Eventually, yes, once everything was resolved. And now? Wei Jian opened his mouth, closed it. He thought about the garden in the morning, the dinner with bad jokes and good food, the lanterns rising over the capital, 4 seconds of a hand around his, warm and certain, the way both of them had stayed until the candles burned down without either of them seeming to notice time passing. I don't know, he said honestly. Xiao Chengyu smiled, slow and real. Nothing performed about it. Shen Liuhe looked at Wei Jian for a long moment, then looked away, and there it was, the tips of his ears, slightly pink. Then stay, Shen Liuhe said quietly, until you do. 4 months later, the last of the old schemes was dismantled. It had not been simple or quick or painless. There had been 3 confrontations with people who had served Ren Yufei's old plans. There had been a very difficult night in month 2, when one of the proxy agents had gone public with a distorted version of events, and Wei Jian had spent 48 hours managing the fallout while running on almost no sleep. There had been a moment in month 3 when Shen Liuhe had put himself physically between Wei Jian and a drawn sword, and Wei Jian had approximately stopped breathing for the rest of that afternoon. There had also been a lot of other things, smaller things, the kind that accumulate quietly. Xiao Chengyu leaving candied fruit on Wei Jian's desk when he came to work on trade documents. Shen Liuhe appearing in the garden not to say anything in particular, but just to be there, in the same space, standing at the edge of the pond. The three of them eating dinner together so many times it stopped feeling like an occasion and started feeling like Tuesday. Wei Jian told them both, separately, 1 month apart, that he had feelings he had not intended and was uncertain what to do with them. Xiao Chengyu had laughed, taken Wei Jian's face between his hands, and said, "Finally, I was waiting for you to figure that out." Shen Liuhe had been quiet for a long time. Then he had said, in the most carefully composed voice Wei Jian had ever heard, "I have not known how to say this for some time." He had looked at the pond. "I am glad you stayed. It was not simple. 3 people never is. There were conversations that were difficult and honest and took a long time. There were nights Wei Jian lay awake, wondering if this was real, if he was real, if he had the right to want this when he had come from somewhere else entirely." But Xiao Chengyu had looked at him once, serious in the way he rarely was, and said, "You keep asking if you have the right to be here. You've spent 4 months proving you do. Stop asking the question and start living the answer." And Shen Liuhe, who expressed things with actions more than words, had placed Wei Jian's hand in both of his own one evening and simply held it. No explanation, no demand, just warmth and steadiness, and the message, very clear and very quiet. "I am not going anywhere." The small house in the southern hills was purchased in the 5th month. It had good soil, it had a view of the mountains. It needed significant renovation, and Xiao Chengyu declared himself in charge of the interior design, which resulted in 3 separate heated debates about curtain colors that somehow ended in all of them laughing. Shen Liuhe showed up to the first renovation day with blueprints he had apparently drawn himself, quietly, without telling anyone. Wei Jian stood in the half-repaired house with plaster dust on his sleeves, and both of them arguing about load-bearing walls behind him, and thought, "I died over a cup of instant noodles. And somehow I ended up here." He went out to stand in the garden, just cleared dirt for now, waiting for seeds. He knelt down and pressed his hand flat against the soil. It was cool and dark and full of potential. Du Fu appeared at the doorway. "My lord, young Master Shin says the eastern wall is structurally sound, and young Master Xiao says it isn't, and I think they might actually come to blows over it." "They won't," Wei Jian said. "Are you sure, my lord?" "Yes. Go tell them I am starting the garden and I need help. That will end the argument." Du Fu disappeared. 30 seconds later, both of them appeared in the garden doorway. Shen Liuhe, with blueprints still rolled under his arm, Xiao Chengyu, with a new smudge of something on his cheek from somewhere. They looked at Wei Jian, crouching in the dirt. "I need to know where to plant the vegetables," Wei Jian said, very seriously. Xiao Chengyu burst out laughing. Shen Liuhe made a sound that was almost, nearly, just barely a laugh. More like the beginning of one, caught and held, but still real. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning the garden. Not the story's garden, not the plot's garden, not Ren Yufei's garden. Wei Jian's garden, with seeds he had chosen, soil he had turned with his own hands, and 2 people who had found him in the middle of a story that was supposed to go very differently, and decided, without being asked, that they wanted to stay in whatever version he was writing instead. The novel had ended with a grand battle, a dramatic reunion, and a very long epilogue about destiny. Wei Jian's version ended with dirt under his fingernails, warm light over the mountains, and the sound of someone he loved laughing at something silly behind him. He thought, "This is enough." He thought, "This is more than enough." He thought, "I need to plant the carrots before sundown." He planted the carrots. The last thing Park Ji-ho remembered before dying was stepping off a curb while reading a novel on his phone. A truck, a flash of light, and then an apron. He opened his eyes to a fire burning low in a stone hearth. The smell hit him first. Ginger, star anise, something rich and slow-cooked. His hands were rough and calloused in a way his actual hands had never been, and when he looked down, there was a large wooden spoon gripped in his right fist like a weapon. He was standing in the middle of the biggest kitchen he had ever seen in his life. Stone counters stretched wall to wall. Copper pots hung from the ceiling on iron hooks. Around him, maybe 30 other cooks moved fast and silent, cutting and stirring and plating, and not one of them looked at him. Not one. He cleared his throat. Nobody turned around. He dropped the spoon on the floor with a loud clatter. A young boy nearby glanced at it, stepped over it, and kept moving. So, he was invisible. Great. It took Ji-ho about 2 hours of standing around and carefully tasting things to figure out his situation. He had transmigrated into a body. The body of a cook named Wei Mingzhu, who apparently worked in the imperial palace kitchens of a dynasty that looked very much like ancient China, except slightly more fictional. Wei Mingzhu had been a cook for 6 years, and in those 6 years had never once been spoken to directly by any official, any servant of rank, or any member of the royal household. The man was a ghost in his own life. Ji-ho felt a strange kind of sad kinship with him. He also felt very hungry, so he ate a bowl of congee he found sitting on the counter, and decided to figure out the rest later. His first full day in the body of Wei Mingzhu taught him several things. 1, he was responsible for making soup, just soup, every day, one specific pot of clear broth for the imperial meal, which would be tasted by an eunuch official, approved or rejected, and then carried away. He had never personally met the emperor, and there was no reason to think he ever would. 2, the other cooks were not mean to him exactly. They just talked around him, over him, past him, like he was part of the furniture. 3, Wei Mingzhu's recipe box was hidden under a loose stone near the fire. Ji-ho found it by accident when he tripped. That recipe box changed everything. He opened it carefully, pages worn thin at the edges from years of handling. The handwriting was cramped and small, but every recipe had a note beside it. Not instructions, feelings. This soup is for homesickness. This dish is for cold mornings when you miss someone. This broth is for grief you cannot name. Ji-ho sat down on the floor right there beside the hearth and read the whole thing. Wei Mingzhu had cooked every dish with a feeling attached to it. He had been trying quietly and alone to put emotion into every meal that left his hands, and nobody had ever noticed. Ji-ho decided right then that if he was going to be stuck in this body, he was going to cook the way this man deserved to cook, with everything. He made the broth that afternoon with the recipe labeled warmth for a person who has forgotten they deserve to be cared for. He did not know who would eat it. He added every ingredient exactly as described, following the notes like a letter. The eunuch came to taste it. He tasted it. He stood very still. Then he tasted it again. He picked up the pot. He walked out of the kitchen. He did not say a single word to Ji-ho. Ji-ho watched him go and thought, well, that's either very good or very bad. He found out the next morning a different eunuch appeared at the start of the kitchen shift. Senior, the kind with an official seal hanging from his belt. He walked directly to Ji-ho, which was alarming because nobody ever walked directly to Ji-ho. You are Wei Mingzhu? Yes, said Ji-ho, with only a small voice crack. His Majesty the Emperor has sent word. Your broth is to be served at every meal from this day forward, morning, afternoon, and evening. Silence fell over the kitchen. Every single cook stopped moving at exactly the same time. Ji-ho could feel 30 pairs of eyes swivel to him in unison. It was the most attention he had received since arriving. Every meal? He said. Every meal. The eunuch left. The kitchen stayed silent for another 5 seconds. Then everyone went back to work and carefully, pointedly, did not look at Ji-ho again. But this time the not looking felt different. This time it had weight. Ji-ho picked up his spoon. His heart was doing something strange and fast in his chest. He thought, I have never met the Emperor. The Emperor has never met me. We have only spoken through a bowl of soup. He looked down at the recipe box and thought about the label he had chosen yesterday. Warmth for a person who has forgotten they deserve to be cared for. He wondered, without meaning to, what that said about the man who ate it and asked for more. 3 weeks passed. Every meal, 3 times a day, Jiho made the broth. Every time the eunuch came to collect it. Every time the pot came back empty. The emperor ate every drop. The kitchen had started to change around Jiho in small ways he was only beginning to notice. When he reached for the good cutting board, someone moved aside. When he needed the back burner, it was always free. Nobody spoke to him still, not really, but the silence had shifted from the invisible kind to the aware kind. He was being noticed. He was not sure how he felt about it. On the 22nd day, a different eunuch arrived at the kitchen, not the usual one. This one was younger, with a nervous energy that made the other cooks bow lower than normal. He carried a piece of paper with a red seal that Jiho, even as a transmigrator with limited knowledge of imperial protocol, recognized immediately as something important. The eunuch stopped in front of Jiho. Everyone in the kitchen found somewhere else to look at extremely carefully. "His Majesty has an inquiry," the eunuch said, reading from the paper in a formal voice that suggested he had practiced this, regarding the preparation method of the broth. Specifically, why it tastes different each day while remaining the same recipe. Jiho blinked. He noticed that? The eunuch looked up from the paper. "Is that your answer?" "No, sorry," Jiho thought fast. "Each batch uses the same ingredients, but the fire is different every day. Morning fire is slower, afternoon fire is hotter, evening fire I let burn down low before I start. The soup learns from the heat." The eunuch wrote this down with a very serious expression. He bowed. He left. Jiho turned back to his pot. His hands were a little shaky. He told himself it was because of the fire, which was definitely too hot right now, and not because the emperor had apparently been thinking about his soup with enough attention to notice daily variation. The answer came back the next morning through the same young eunuch. "His Majesty says, tell the cook the evening version is his favorite." And then the eunuch left again. Jiho stood there holding a ladle. The cook next to him, a stern woman named Ma Shu, who had never once spoken to Jiho directly in 3 weeks, said, without looking up from the vegetables she was chopping, "You should feel honored." "I do," said Jiho. "Good," she said. "Make sure the evening broth does not get worse." Which was her way of saying congratulations, probably. Jiho chose to take it that way. He made the evening broth that night with the recipe labeled, "For loneliness that you pretend is not there." He had been cycling through the box, choosing by instinct. He did not know what was making him pick the ones he picked. He just read the labels and chose the one that felt right. The next morning the eunuch came again. "His Majesty asks if the cook has a name." Jiho's heart did something complicated. The emperor had been eating his soup for almost a month, and only now asked his name. Not through official records, not through the kitchen supervisor. He asked through a message, informal, like a question between people. "Wei Mingzhu," Jiho said. "His Majesty will remember it," the eunuch said, and left. Jiho put down his spoon and looked at the fire for a long time. He thought about the novel he had been reading when he got hit by the truck. It had been a transmigration story, actually. He had been on chapter 43. The protagonist had just met the male lead for the first time. He thought about the face of the emperor, which he had never seen. He only knew the man through an empty bowl returned to the kitchen 3 times a day, and a series of short messages passed through a nervous young eunuch who seemed to feel very stressed about all of it. He thought about a recipe book full of feelings. He thought, I am in a transmigration story, am I not? He thought, oh no. And then he laughed, alone in the early morning kitchen with the fire burning low, because it was either laugh or panic, and panic would ruin the broth. Jiho saw the emperor for the first time by accident. It was raining, not the polite kind of rain, but the aggressive kind, the kind that comes sideways and turns the palace corridors into small rivers. Jiho had been sent, for the first and probably last time, to deliver an additional pot of broth to the royal banquet hall, because apparently the kitchen porter had broken his ankle, slipping on the wet stones, and there was nobody else. He had been told 3 things. Walk quickly, keep your eyes down, do not speak unless spoken to. He had walked quickly, he had kept his eyes down, he had rounded a corner too fast in the rain and walked directly into a person. The pot survived. Jiho did not drop it. This was, he felt, a miracle of spatial awareness. He looked up to apologize. He made eye contact with the most unfairly beautiful person he had ever seen in either of his 2 lives. The man was tall, dark formal robes, hair pinned with something gold, high cheekbones, and the kind of sharp jaw that made Jiho think, completely involuntarily, that the person who carved this face had put in extra time on that particular detail. He was flanked by guards who had their hands on their swords, which was a sign that this was probably a very important person, the most important person. The emperor looked down at the pot in Jiho's arms. He looked up at Jiho's face. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then the emperor said, in a voice that was lower and quieter than Jiho had imagined from all the formal messages, "You are Wei Mingju." It was not a question. "Yes," Jiho said, and remembered immediately that he was supposed to bow and bowed, almost sloshing the broth. "The soup. I was bringing it to the banquet hall. The porter." The emperor looked at the pot again. He had an expression Jiho could not read. It was very flat, like a calm lake, the kind that is very deep. You walk fast. "I did not want it to get cold," Jiho said, and then added, "Your Majesty, 1 second too late." Something in the emperor's expression moved. It was not a smile. It was more like a shift, the way light changes when a cloud passes. He stepped to the side of the path to let Jiho pass. "Continue," he said. Jiho continued. He walked all the way to the banquet hall without tripping, handed the pot to the waiting official, turned around, and walked all the way back to the kitchen. He sat down on the floor next to the fire. He said to nobody, "That man is going to be a problem." Mashu, who was grinding spices nearby, said, without looking up, "Yes." "You heard what I said?" "I hear everything in this kitchen," she said. "I just choose not to involve myself." She paused her grinding. "His Majesty is known to be serious. He rarely speaks to people outside official settings. He has not spoken informally to anyone in the kitchen in 6 years. 6 years. Jiho had been here exactly 23 days. "I see," said Jiho. "Do you?" said Mashu. It was not a question either. She went back to grinding. That evening, Jiho made the broth with the recipe labeled, "For the strange feeling of meeting someone who already knows something about you." He had not known Wei Mingju had written that one. He found it tucked behind 2 other pages, like it had been hidden slightly. The pot came back empty as always. But this time there was something with it. A small folded piece of paper tucked under the lid. Not a formal message, just a few words, written in a hand that was controlled and precise. It said, "The evening version remains the best." Why? Jiho stared at it for a long time. He wrote back on a scrap of paper, pushed it into the next morning's delivery, because by evening everything has had more time to think. He did not know why he wrote that. He did not know if it made sense. He handed the pot to the eunuch and told himself to stop being weird about a man he had met for 30 seconds in the rain. He was not very successful. That night he dreamed about a pair of eyes looking at him across a pot of broth, flat and calm and very, very deep. The paper messages became a thing. Nobody officially acknowledged that they existed. Not the eunuch, who collected the pot every meal with a carefully blank face. Not Ma Shu, who definitely noticed and said nothing. Not any of the other cooks who had gone from ignoring Jiho to watching him with the focused attention of people who had discovered something interesting happening in their workplace and did not want to miss it. The emperor's messages were short. Jiho's were short too. Usually, it felt like neither of them wanted to be the one who wrote more. Day 29. Today's broth had a different smell, almost sweet. Jiho. I added 1 extra piece of dried fruit. It felt right. Day 31. Does the cook always decide things by feeling? Jiho. The cook who taught me believed food remembers who made it. If you are distracted, the food knows. Day 32. After a long pause of nothing. What is the cook thinking about today? No question mark. Jiho held the paper for a while. He wrote back. Someone I have not met properly yet. Then he stared at what he had written, thought that was deeply too honest, and sent it anyway, because changing it at that point felt like cowardice. The reply came back the same evening. Is that an answer or a complaint? Jiho laughed so hard he accidentally oversalted the pot and had to start over. By day 35 he had started looking forward to the messages more than was reasonable. He told himself it was just because the transmigrated life of an invisible cook was boring, and this was the most interesting thing happening to him. He told himself that a lot. He also started putting more care into what he chose from the recipe box. He read the labels slower. He sat with the feeling of each one before choosing. Day 38, the Emperor's message said, "I would like to see how it is made." Jiho stared at that. He wrote back, carefully, "The Imperial Kitchen is not usually a place for visitors." The reply came in about 4 hours, which was fast. "I am aware, I built it." Which, Jiho thought, was technically a great point. He also thought, a little wildly, that the Emperor had just made a joke. A very dry, understated joke. He wrote back, "Your Majesty is correct, and I apologize for forgetting that." And then under it he wrote, "Tomorrow morning, the fire starts at the first bell." He sent it before he could overthink. The kitchen, the next morning, was very quiet. Ma Shu arrived early, which she never did. 2 other cooks arrived early, which they also never did. Everyone was chopping and stirring with the very focused energy of people trying extremely hard to look like they were not waiting for something. Jiho started the fire at the first bell. At the second bell, the Emperor walked into the kitchen. No announcement, no procession, just the guards outside the door and the Emperor himself, in simpler robes than before, standing in the entrance of the kitchen and looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. Which, Jiho realized, he probably was. Emperors did not typically visit kitchens. Every cook in the room bowed without looking up. The Emperor waved one hand and said, "Continue." They continued, with slightly more concentration than usual. He walked to where Jiho was standing, at the large center fire. "You start very early," the Emperor said. "The first pot needs 2 hours," Jiho said. He handed over a small tasting bowl without thinking about it, then thought about it, and almost took it back. But the Emperor took it from him without looking offended. He tasted it. The broth was only 40 minutes in, not ready yet. He said, "It is thinner, more plain. It gets richer as it goes," Jiho said. "Right now it is still becoming itself." The Emperor looked at him, that flat, deep expression again. "You speak about soup like it is a person. Wei Mingzhu, who taught me how to cook, believed it was," Jiho said. He was not exactly lying. The recipe book was full of that belief. "And you?" "I am starting to." They stood next to the fire, in the same silence that was not actually silence, the kind with things moving around inside it. The kitchen was very carefully not watching them. The fire cracked and shifted. The Emperor said, very quietly, "I have not entered this part of the palace in 6 years." He did not say why. Jiho did not ask. He just added 3 more ingredients to the pot and stirred, slow and even, the way the recipe described. The Emperor stayed for the whole 2 hours. He did not say much else. When the broth was finished and poured and the eunuch came to collect it, the Emperor stood aside, watched it go, and then said to Jiho, "Same time tomorrow?" Jiho said yes before he understood what he was agreeing to. When the Emperor left, every cook in the kitchen simultaneously exhaled. Ma Shu pointed her knife at Jiho and said, "You are going to cause such problems." "I know," said Jiho. "Good," she said, which meant she thought it was worth it, or possibly that she had no idea how to stop it. Either way. His name was Minister Chen Boyang, and he arrived on day 42 like bad weather, formal and cold, and very well dressed in the way of someone who wanted you to notice how formal and cold and well dressed he was. He came to the kitchen himself, which was the first odd thing. Officials did not come to the kitchen. Jiho was in the middle of the morning prep when Ma Shu appeared at his elbow and said in a low voice, "Someone is here for you, be careful." Chen Boyang stood at the kitchen entrance. He looked around the room with the expression of someone who had walked into a lesser establishment than expected. He looked at Jiho. "You are Wei Mingzhu." "Yes," said Jiho. "You are cooking for His Majesty." "His Majesty eats what comes from this kitchen," Jiho said carefully. "I am one of the cooks." Chen Boyang's expression said he found that answer unhelpfully technical. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You have been seen in the kitchen with the Emperor, several mornings now. People are talking." Jiho thought, "Let them talk. I am making soup," he said. His Majesty expressed interest in the preparation process. "I am simply cooking." "You are simply a cook," Chen Boyang corrected. That is all you are. The emperor has many responsibilities. His attention should not be drawn to. He gestured at Jiho and the surrounding kitchen with a movement that managed to dismiss everything at once. Distractions. Jiho was quiet for a moment. He looked at the pot on the fire. Then he said, very calmly, I do not call him here. He comes. If you want him to stop, you will need to speak with him about that. Chen Boyang went still in the way of someone who had expected a different reaction and was recalculating. You are bold, he said, for a cook. I am just finishing the morning broth, Jiho said. If you have nothing else, I should focus on this. The fire changes everything. The minister left. Jiho kept his breathing even and his hands steady. When the kitchen door closed, he stirred the pot 3 times fast and reminded himself that he was, technically, just a cook. He had no power here. He had no rank. What he had was a recipe box full of feelings and an emperor who came to his kitchen every morning before the second bell. He chose the recipe labeled, for standing firm when someone tries to make you feel small. He made it well. That evening, the message under the lid said, Chen Boyang came to see you today. Jiho wrote back, he did. Reply, what did he say? Jiho, that I am a distraction, a longer gap than usual. Then, he is wrong. Jiho read that twice. He pressed the paper flat on the counter and looked at those 3 words for a long time. He felt something in his chest shift. He wrote back, he is not entirely wrong. I have been thinking about whether this is good for you. Reply faster this time. Do not make that decision for me. Jiho sat with that for the whole evening. He burned the late pot slightly because he was not paying attention. Ma Shu fixed it without saying anything and gave him a look that said she was absolutely saying something, just not out loud. He wrote one more note that night. He folded it and left it with the pot, even though there was no meal delivery until morning. It said, I am not going anywhere. I am only worried. When the morning eunuch collected the pot, he also left a note. 3 words again. I know. Thank you. Jiho did not talk to anyone for an hour. He just cooked. It happened on day 51, and nobody was ready for it, including Jiho. The morning kitchen visit was normal. The emperor stood by the fire. Jiho cooked. They talked about small things, the recipe, the weather. One time the emperor had made a comment about court meetings being long, and Jiho had said, sounds like you need better snacks, entirely by accident. And the emperor had looked at him with that deep lake expression and said, probably, very seriously, and Jiho had had to turn back to the fire before his face did something embarrassing. On day 51, the emperor arrived early, before the fire was fully started. Jiho was crouched by the hearth, adding the first kindling, when he heard footsteps and looked up. You are early, Jiho said, because he apparently had no self-preservation instinct. So are you, said the emperor. I live here, said Jiho, basically. The emperor almost smiled. Jiho had started to learn the signs. The small thing that happened in the corner of his mouth. The slight shift around the eyes. It lasted about half a second, and then the flat expression returned, but Jiho was getting faster at catching it. He went back to the fire. The emperor sat on a low stool near the counter, which was still slightly unbelievable every time it happened. An emperor sitting in a kitchen on a basic wooden stool. For a while it was quiet. Then the emperor said, Chen Boyang has been speaking to other ministers. About me, said Jiho. About the time I spend here. A pause. He believes I am behaving in a way that is, another pause, not appropriate for my position. Jiho stirred the pot. Maybe he is right. I told you not to decide that for me. I am not deciding. I am saying maybe someone who knows court rules better than I do has a point. Chen Boyang has a point about many things, the emperor said. He is still wrong about this. He was looking at the fire. His voice was the same even tone he always used, but there was something underneath it today that Jiho had not heard before. I spent 4 years being told what was appropriate, what to prioritize, who to speak to. The broth was the first thing in 4 years that felt like something outside all of that. Jiho stopped stirring. The emperor did not look at him. You cook things that feel like something. I do not know how, but every meal I know which recipe you chose and why. even though you never tell me. The morning ones feel like the day starting. The afternoon ones feel like effort. The evening ones feel like..." He stopped. "Like what?" Jiho said, and his voice was quieter than he meant. "Like someone is sitting with you," the emperor said, "even when you are alone." The fire cracked. Something fragrant rose from the pot. The kitchen around them was empty because it was still very early, and for once there were no other cooks pretending not to listen. Jiho turned from the fire and looked at the emperor directly. He had been careful not to stare. He had been careful about a lot of things. He stopped being careful. He said, "The recipe I chose this morning is labeled in the book as, for the feeling you get when you realize you have been waiting for someone without knowing it." The emperor looked up at him. Neither of them moved. Then the emperor stood up. He was taller than Jiho by several inches, and standing this close that registered more clearly than usual, he said, quietly, "Wei Mingju." "Yes," said Jiho. "I do not know the protocol for this situation." "Neither do I," said Jiho. "I am a cook." "You are the most inconvenient person I have met in 6 years of ruling," the emperor said. And then, almost like the words surprised him too, "I have been looking for reasons to come to this kitchen for 7 weeks." Jiho thought, this is where a smart person says something diplomatic. He was not a smart person. He said, "The broth is ready at the first bell. I am always here." The emperor looked at him for a long moment. "Always," he said, and it sounded like he was testing the word. "Always," Jiho confirmed. Something in the emperor's face changed, slow and real, like a lock opening. He reached out and picked up the tasting bowl from the counter. He dipped it into the pot and tasted it without looking away from Jiho. "This one," he said, "is the best yet?" Jiho turned back to the fire so the emperor could not see his face. His hands were shaking a little, not badly, just enough to know something was happening. The petition arrived at court on day 58. Jiho found out the way he found out most things, through Ma Shu, who had sources everywhere in the palace and said nothing unless it was important. She appeared at his side at midday and said, without preamble, "Chen Boyang has submitted a formal complaint to the court council. He is requesting that all kitchen staff who have had direct contact with the emperor above normal duty be reassigned to the outer palace." Jiho put down his knife. "All kitchen staff," he said. "Specifically you," said Ma Shu, but he worded it broadly so it would not look targeted. Jiho was quiet for a while. He looked at the fire. "What happens if the council approves it? You move to the outer palace kitchens. No contact with the imperial household. Different kitchen entirely." She paused. "His Majesty would not receive your broth anymore. A different cook would take over. The thing about being a transmigrated nobody in a royal palace was that you had very little power over anything." Jiho knew this. He had known it since the first day. He was not nobility. He was not an official. He was a cook, with calloused hands and a recipe box that had been hidden under a stone. He thought about the messages under the lid. He thought about a man sitting on a wooden stool by a fire for 7 weeks, because the soup made him feel less alone. He said, "When is the council meeting?" "Tomorrow morning," said Ma Shu. That night, Jiho did not sleep well. He lay on the thin mat in the kitchen staff quarters and stared at the ceiling and thought about what he could do, which was essentially nothing, and what the emperor would do, which he did not know. He had left a note in that evening's delivery. Just, "I heard about the petition. Do what is right for your court. I will be fine." The emperor's reply came back an hour later, which was very fast and meant someone had run. "Stop telling me what is right." And then, in smaller writing below, as if added after, "You will not be going anywhere." Jiho held that paper for a long time. The morning arrived. The council meeting happened across the palace, in a room Jiho had never seen. He started the fire at the first bell and cooked and waited. The emperor did not come at the second bell. He did not come at the third. Jiho cooked. He chose a recipe labeled, "For when you are afraid but you keep going anyway." He put everything into it. The eunuch collected the morning pot without a word. At midday, the senior eunuch returned to the kitchen. Not the nervous young one, the important one with the seal. He walked to Jiho directly and said, "His Majesty addressed the court council this morning regarding the petition." Every cook in the kitchen stopped moving. "The petition has been dismissed. His Majesty stated that decisions regarding palace staff belong solely to his authority. and that Minister Chen Boyang overstepped the council's scope. The senior eunuch paused. His Majesty also said, for the record, that the kitchen broth has had direct positive effect on imperial health, and that reorganizing the kitchen staff would be counterproductive to court function. Jiho said. He said that? About the broth? Those were the official stated reasons, yes, the senior eunuch said. His face stayed official and blank, but something around his eyes suggested he found all of this very entertaining. He also had Minister Chen Boyang formally reminded that the inner palace staff is not the council's concern. He bowed. He left. The kitchen stayed very quiet for 4 seconds. Then Ma Shu said, loudly, for the first time in months, to Jiho directly, "That man just went to court for your soup." "For the soup," Jiho said. "Yes," said Ma Shu. "Absolutely for the soup." Jiho put his face in his hands. His ears were very warm. He was not going to say what he was thinking, because what he was thinking was both obvious and terrifying. That evening's delivery came back with a note. "Are you still there?" Jiho wrote back, "I am making your evening broth right now. The fire is good tonight." Reply, "Good. Come to the garden gate tomorrow, before the first bell. I would like to walk." Jiho looked at that. He looked at it for a while. He wrote, "Yes." The garden in the hour before dawn was another world. Jiho had never been in this part of the palace. The inner garden was full of paths that curved around small ponds, stone lanterns that burned low, trees old enough to have watched several dynasties pass. In the dark before sunrise, the whole place smelled like wet earth and night-blooming flowers. The emperor was already at the gate when Jiho arrived, alone. No guards visible, though Jiho was fairly sure they were close. He was in simple robes, the kind that did not announce themselves. He looked for once like a person rather than an institution. They walked. For a while, neither of them said anything. The garden was quiet enough that Jiho could hear the water in the pond and the distant bells of the early rising city beyond the palace walls. The emperor said, "How long have you been here, in the palace?" "Almost 2 months," said Jiho. "Where were you before?" Jiho thought about a truck and a phone and a transmigration story on chapter 43. He said, "Somewhere far away. A different life. Do you miss it?" He thought about it seriously. His small apartment, instant noodles at midnight, complete anonymity. "Sometimes," he said. "Less than I expected." The emperor nodded. They walked around the first pond. A bird moved in the reeds. "I have been thinking," the emperor said, in the tone of someone who had been thinking very carefully, "about what is appropriate." "And?" said Jiho. "And I have decided that I have spent 6 years being told what is appropriate for my position, and I am tired of it." He said this flatly, like a fact. "I am also aware of what it means to pay this much attention to a kitchen cook and what people will say. I am not naive about the politics." "What did you decide?" Jiho asked. "That the politics are manageable." The emperor stopped walking. He turned to look at Jiho directly, which he did not always do. Usually he looked at things beside Jiho, or the fire, or the pot. Now he looked at him. "That I have spent 7 weeks finding reasons to visit a kitchen, and I am too old for that kind of indirect nonsense." "You are 26, said Jiho, who had gathered this from kitchen gossip. "Exactly," said the emperor. "Too old." Jiho thought he was probably going to smile, and he worked hard not to. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," the emperor said slowly, like each word was placed carefully, "that I have no practice at this. I have had very little of anything that was only mine in a long time, and this," he gestured between them, a small movement, "has been mine, more than almost anything else." Jiho looked at him. The garden was lightening around them, the sky going from black to the dark blue that comes just before color. He said, "The recipe book has a label for this." "I know," said the emperor. "You have been working through it." "You noticed?" "I noticed everything," the emperor said. "It came out very quiet. Since the first bowl, I noticed." Jiho thought about Wei Mingju, who had cooked alone in that kitchen for 6 years, and nobody had ever looked. He thought about a recipe labeled for warmth, given to someone who forgot they could receive it, and an empty bowl that came back every single time. He said, "I want to show you something." He reached into his sleeve, where he had started keeping the recipe box. He had not planned to bring it tonight. He brought it anyway. He opened it and showed the emperor the first page. The handwriting, small and certain. The first recipe. Below it the label. Warmth for a person who has forgotten they deserve to be cared for. The emperor read it. He looked at the page for a long time. "That was the first one you sent," he said. "Yes. You chose it by feeling." "Yes." The emperor closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them again, something in his face was different. Less like a lake. More like water that is actually moving. "Wei Mingzhu," he said. "You can call me Mingzhu," Jiho said, "if you want." "Mingzhu," he said it like he was learning it, like he wanted to learn it. "I would like permission to visit the kitchen, every morning." Not as an emperor visiting a kitchen, as... He stopped, started again. "As myself." "You have always been yourself in my kitchen," Jiho said. The emperor looked at him with that expression that Jiho had spent 2 months learning to read. He was getting much better at it. What it said right now was something close to grateful, close to relieved, close to something that did not have a quick name yet but was growing. The sky was getting lighter. In the palace, the first bell would ring soon. Jiho closed the recipe book. He said, "Come to the kitchen at the first bell. I will start the fire." "Every morning?" the emperor said. "Every morning," said Jiho. They walked back to the gate together, not quite touching, the garden quiet around them. At the gate they stopped. The city beyond the walls was starting to wake. The palace bells were about to ring. The emperor said, not looking away, "The recipe you will make today." "I have not chosen it yet," Jiho said. "What does it need to say?" Jiho thought about 2 months of messages. An empty bowl. A man sitting on a wooden stool by a fire. A dismissed petition. A garden before dawn. He said, "I think today is for the feeling of something beginning." The emperor was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, so quietly it was almost just breath. "Yes." The first bell rang. Jiho smiled. He went to start the fire. Behind him, he heard the emperor follow, and he thought, well, here we are then, the invisible cook and the lonely emperor and the fire between them. It was, all things considered, a very good place to begin. Hazel stood up, walked in a small circle, sat back down. "Okay, so, what does Bastian do in your book?" He tries to drive a wedge between Kale and Aaron. He spreads carefully chosen lies, makes it seem like Aaron has divided loyalties. He nearly succeeds. And now Kale's attention is on you instead. "So Bastian might target me," Jinhyo said. "Yes, I'm the new variable he doesn't understand, and what Bastian doesn't understand, he removes." Hazel looked at him steadily. "Then we need to be careful." "We," Jinhyo repeated. "You said we." Hazel crossed his arms. "I'm your friend. Also, this is objectively the most interesting thing that has ever happened to me, and I refuse to be excluded." Jinho felt something warm settle in his chest. Uncomplicated warmth, the kind that came from a person who simply showed up and stayed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't get emotional. I'm being selfish." Hazel waved a hand. "Now, does Bastian win in the book?" "No. Duke Aaron figures it out eventually and exposes him. So Aaron is smart. Very." Hazel tapped his chin. Then maybe Aaron is an ally. Jinyo hadn't thought about it that way. He had been so busy thinking of Aaron as the person Kale was supposed to be with, the right ending, the original story, that he hadn't considered Aaron as simply a person. A smart, warm, perceptive person who had voluntarily sat across from a nervous stranger at a formal dinner and laughed genuinely at the rose comment. "Maybe," Jinho said. The next morning, Jinho found Bastian's first move. It was a note delivered to the wrong table at breakfast, clearly meant to be seen, suggesting that Kim Si-woo's presence near the crown prince was connected to his family seeking political advantage, and that his interest in Kale was strategic rather than genuine. Someone showed the note to Kale, as intended. Jinhyo found out from Hazel an hour later. He went immediately to find Kale, not because he had a plan, but because he was tired of letting things happen around him. He was not Kim Si-woo, passive background character. He was Lee Jin-ho, and he had read this story, and he was not going to let Bastion run it. He found Kale in the small study off the west wing. Kale was standing at the window and did not turn when Jin-ho came in. "Someone says you have reasons for being near me," Kale said. "Someone is trying to cause problems," Jin-ho said. "Yes." Kale turned then. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were doing something complicated. "Are they wrong?" Jin-ho looked at him directly. "My family has no plan involving you. I have no political reason for being here. The reason I kept coming back to the garden was because—" He stopped, started again. "Because I wanted to." Silence. "Because I wanted to," Jin-ho repeated, more quietly. "That's all." Kale looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, some of the tension in his shoulders changed. "Someone is trying to separate us," Kale said. The word "well" hit to Jin-ho like a quiet knock to the chest. "Yes," Jin-ho said, "and I think I know who." Everything felt like it was moving too fast. Jin-ho had spent a week trying to stay in the background. Now he was standing in the Crown Prince's private study, having just implied he knew who the secondary villain was, while also actively trying not to think about how Kale had said, "Ah," in a voice that sounded like it meant something. "Tell me," Kale said. "Lord Bastion," Jin-ho said. "He's been watching you, watching anyone near you. The note this morning was from him, or arranged by him. He works through careful suggestions and small lies, never anything provable." Kale's eyes narrowed. "How do you know this?" This was the part Jin-ho had known would come. He had prepared 3 different answers. They all sounded ridiculous under the actual weight of the question. "I pay close attention," Jin-ho said finally. "I read people." Kale stepped closer, not threatening, just the way he moved when he was thinking, like he needed physical proximity to understand something. "You said that before, that you read a lot, maps, floor plans, architecture." "Yes, and people?" "Sometimes." Kale looked at him with those silver eyes, and Jin-ho had the deeply uncomfortable feeling that Kale was reading. Right back. "What do you see when you read me?" Kale asked. "Oh no." Jin-ho's mouth decided to take over from his brain, which was apparently not paying attention. "Someone very lonely who got so used to it that he started calling it preference," he said. "Someone who notices everything and shows nothing. Someone who is, despite all of that, genuinely kind when he thinks no one is looking." The room was very quiet. Kale said nothing for so long that Jin-ho started composing his own eulogy inside his head. "That's the most anyone has ever said to me," Kale said finally, low and careful, like he was handling something fragile. "I'm sorry," Jin-ho said automatically. "I shouldn't have. Don't apologize." Kale's voice was firmer. "I don't want you to apologize for saying something real." Jin-ho's heart was doing something very unregulated. Duke Eren chose that precise moment to appear in the doorway. He looked between them, at Kale, at Jin-ho, at the extremely charged air between them, with the expression of someone who had just walked into a room and understood immediately everything that had been happening before they arrived. "I came to talk about Bastion," Eren said, "but I think I may have missed something." "Bastion first," Kale said, moving back slightly. Eren came in and sat down and told them what he had found, that Bastion had been meeting quietly with 2 members of a rival faction, that the note was just the first step, that there were larger plans in motion. In the novel, Eren had discovered all of this alone and brought it to Kale as proof of his loyalty. Here he was, bringing it to both of them, looking between them equally. When they had finished planning their response to Bastion, a careful, documented process that would expose him without making Kale look reactive, Eren stood to leave and then stopped at the door. "Siwoo," he said. Jin-ho looked up. Eren smiled at him, and it was warm and clear and entirely without rivalry. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. He left. Jin-ho stared at the empty doorway. "He means it," Kale said quietly from beside him. "Eren doesn't say things he doesn't mean." "I know," Jin-ho said. He did know. He had read it across 400 pages. Eren was genuinely good. And maybe, Jin-ho was slowly coming to understand, the story he had loved was not wrong. It was just not the only version of love in it. Later, walking back to his room in the blue evening light. Jinho thought about Chapter 12. The scene he had imagined was the beginning of everything. Eren arriving, Kale turning toward him, the long, slow love story starting its first page. But that scene had passed. Eren had arrived, and Kale had not turned the way the novel said he would. He had turned a different direction, toward a side character no one was supposed to notice, standing in the East Garden, talking to roses. Maybe, Jinho thought with something careful and fragile opening in his chest, some stories just write themselves differently in the living. Bastian moved on a Sunday evening, during a formal reception. He was precise about it. A word here, an implication there. A slowly spreading suggestion that Kim Si-woo's family had been feeding information about the palace's internal politics to an outside party. By the time Jinho heard about it, half the room had already heard some version of the story, and the other half was watching to see what happened. Jinho stood very still and took a slow breath. Hassel appeared beside him with the calm face of someone who had been waiting for this. Now, he said quietly. Now, Jinho agreed. They had prepared for this. Not perfectly. They were two minor nobles, not experienced political operators, but they had spent several evenings with Kale, and then separately with Eren, mapping out exactly how Bastian worked, what he needed to be exposed, and where his evidence trail was thin enough to pull on. The pull was Lord Bastian's financial records, and specifically 3 payments to a document forger whose name had come up in a completely unrelated merchant dispute earlier that year. Eren had found the thread. Jinho had known to look for it because he knew Bastian's methods from the novel. Together, they had built something real from it. Eren moved first, and he moved beautifully, crossing the reception room with his easy, confident walk, speaking to 3 different senior nobles in a row, dropping the thread of the forger's name into each conversation so quietly it sounded like nothing. Just a piece of public record, just something he happened to know. By the time Bastian realized what was happening, the shape of it was already in the room. Kale did not say anything dramatic. He simply walked to where Bastian was standing, looked at him with those flat silver eyes, and said 4 quiet words. We need to talk privately. And the tone of it, the complete absence of warmth, said everything that needed to be said. Jinho watched from the side and felt something between relief and exhaustion loosen in his shoulders. Hazel handed him a small cup of something warm. You look like you've been holding your breath for a week. I have been, Jinho said. You can breathe now. In a minute. Bastian was removed quietly from the reception. No drama, no public scene. Kale was too careful for that. The official process would follow through proper channels, with Eren's documentation and the forger's record as foundation. It would be tidy, legal, and undeniable. Jinho finally breathed. Later that night, when the reception had emptied and the corridors were quiet, Kale found Jinho sitting on the steps of the East Garden entrance, looking at the stars that were visible from the gap in the roofline. Jinho heard his footsteps and did not turn around. Kale sat down beside him, not across, not at a formal distance, beside, close enough that their arms were almost touching. They sat in silence for a while, which should have been uncomfortable and was not. You knew what Bastian would do, Kale said. Not an accusation, just a statement, offered carefully. I had a feeling, Jinho said. And you planned ahead. Eren did most of the work. I just knew where to look. Another silence. Then Kale said, quietly, How long have you been carrying all of this alone? Jinho turned to look at him. In the dark, Kale's profile was softer, the sharpness of him gentled by shadow and tiredness. He looked less like a prince and more like a person. Since I got here, Jinho said honestly. That's a very long time. It's been a few weeks. Still, Kale looked at him sideways. You should have told me sooner. You're the crown prince, Jinho said. And I'm, if you say, just a minor noble. Kale interrupted. I will be genuinely upset. Jinho blinked. Kale turned to look at him fully, and his expression was the most open Jinho had ever seen it, like someone had taken the carved ice face and simply set it down somewhere else. I don't know how to do this, Kale said. Say what I want to say. It's not something I've had practice in. His jaw moved. But I don't want to not say it and have you think I feel nothing. Jinho's heart was doing the unregulated thing again. You don't have to be careful with the words. Jinho said softly. Just say what's true. Kale looked at him for a long moment. Then, I think about you constantly. I look for you in rooms before I know I'm doing it. When you're not there, I notice. When you are there, it's the only thing that makes the room feel less like a performance. He paused. I've never told anyone that. I've never felt it before. Jinho could feel his own heartbeat in his throat. I'm a side character, he said, a last small protest that even he didn't believe anymore. You're not, Kale said simply. Not to me. The stars were still there. The garden was quiet. Somewhere inside, Hazel was probably eating unauthorized snacks from the reception and being cheerful about it. Duke Aaron was probably writing neat notes about Bastian's case in elegant handwriting. The world was still turning the way it was supposed to. Just not the way it was written. Jinho looked at this man beside him. This person who noticed small things and showed nothing and was, when he thought no one was looking, genuinely, simply kind. And he thought about the choice he had made weeks ago, on a floor, alone, when he had first understood what he felt. Me too, Jinho said. All of it, me too. Kale looked at him. Then, slowly, as if he was doing something he had to think about first, he reached out and covered Jinho's hand with his own. Neither of them moved for a long time. It was enough, more than enough. Spring arrived loudly. The palace gardens were full of color, red and yellow and the kind of reckless pink that shows up in early warmth and refuses to apologize for itself. Jinho stood in the east garden with a cup of tea he had been holding long enough for it to go cold, looking at the roses. Still giving them feedback? Said a voice behind him. He turned. Kale was walking toward him through the garden path, still dressed in the formal coat from his morning council session, looking slightly exhausted in the way he always looked after 2 hours of political meetings. Constructive criticism, Jinho said. They respond well to it. The roses. The roses. Very growth-oriented audience. Kale stopped beside him and looked at the roses with the expression of a person reconsidering everything he thought he knew about horticulture. Then he looked at Jinho, then back at the roses, then at Jinho again. You are the strangest person I have ever met, he said. And yet here you are, Jinho said. Kale's mouth moved. The ghost smile, which Jinho had spent months carefully collecting, had graduated into an actual smile over the past several weeks. Still small, still quiet, still something only certain people got to see. But real. Here I am, Kale agreed. It had been 2 months since the Bastion incident. 2 months since the steps of the East Garden and the careful words and the hand covering a hand. 2 months of something that was fragile at first, and then steady, and then simply there, as natural as the garden paths Jinho had known before he ever walked them. Nothing had been announced. Nothing official had changed. They were careful, because they had to be. Because the world was still the world, and politics was still politics, and Kale was still a crown prince, with more responsibilities than any one person should reasonably carry. But in the private spaces, the garden, the small study, the quiet corridor at night, they were simply themselves. It was more than Jinho had ever expected to have. Duke Aaron had become something Jinho had not predicted, a genuine friend. The three of them had settled into something easy and warm, a kind of orbit that felt nothing like rivalry, and everything like people who simply understood each other. Aaron had never, not once, made Jinho feel like a usurper or an unexpected complication. He had simply made room, warmly, without drama, the way he did everything. The story went differently than I expected, Jinho had told Aaron once, quietly, in the library. Aaron had smiled at him with those dark, warm eyes. Most good stories do. Hazel, for his part, had declared himself the official historian of the whole situation, and was apparently keeping notes. Jinho had firmly told him to stop. Hazel had cheerfully refused. Generations will want to know about this, Hazel had said. The side character who rewrite the main plot. It's incredible material. Please do not write a book about my personal life. No promises. In the East Garden, Kale sat down on the low stone bench near the roses, still wearing his formal coat, still slightly exhausted, and leaned back and looked at the sky. Jinho sat beside him and drank his cold tea without complaint. Council wants to discuss the northern border agreements this afternoon, Kale said. Then the taxation review. Then the water infrastructure proposal. He closed his eyes briefly. I am extremely tired of being the crown prince today. You're very good at it though, Jinhyo said. Being tired of it? Being a crown prince? Kale opened his eyes and looked at Jinhyo sideways. Says the person who gave feedback to roses. I stand by my record. A pause. The garden was warm and unhurried around them. Somewhere above the walls, birds were involved in an argument that seemed personal. In the original story, Jinho said carefully, they talked about it sometimes, in pieces, what he remembered. The North Border agreements took 3 chapters to resolve. And? They resolved it, because Aaron suggested a format for the negotiation that neither side felt was a concession. I have the outline in my head if it helps. Kale looked at him. Something quiet and complicated moved through his expression. You carry a lot, he said softly. It's useful sometimes. I don't mean the plot details. Kale turned toward him. I mean all of it. You woke up somewhere completely strange. You didn't belong in this story at all, according to how you tell it. And instead of, he paused, searching for words. Instead of falling apart, you just helped. Every person you could, stayed careful, watched out for threats I didn't even know were coming. Jinho looked at him. Someone had to. It didn't have to be you. It was me anyway. Kale reached over and took the cold cup from Jinho's hands and set it on the bench, and then held Jinho's hand instead, which was objectively a better use of the space. I'm glad it was you, Kale said quietly. I'm glad you talked to the roses. I'm glad you said strange things and looked at the world like you already understood it. I'm glad you're here. Jinho looked at their hands, at the garden around them, at the palace walls and the spring sky above them. He had reincarnated into a romance novel, not as the hero, not as the main villain. As a side character, no one was supposed to remember. He had known the ending. He had known who was supposed to fall in love and how and why. He had planned to stay invisible, stay background, stay out of the story's way, and let it be what it was written to be. And instead, through roses and cold tea and one word, you said quietly in a small study, and a friend who kept notes, and a duke who made room, and a prince who noticed small things. He had ended up somewhere the original story never went. He was not a side character anymore. He did not think he had been one for a long time. I'm glad I'm here too, he said. Kale squeezed his hand once. They sat together in the warm spring garden while the birds continued their argument above and the roses had no notes to give back today. Somewhere in the palace, Hazel was writing this down. Somewhere in a drawing room, Aaron was laughing about something with total and genuine warmth. And Lee Jinho, who had died on a Tuesday eating instant noodles in his underwear and woken up in a book that was not written for him, sat in a garden that smelled like spring and held a hand that was not supposed to be his, and thought, sometimes the story gets better when someone changes it. He smiled. You're smiling at nothing again, Kale said. I'm smiling at the roses. There are no roses in front of you. They know I'm thinking about them. Kale looked at the sky with the expression of a man deeply in love with a person who was completely ridiculous, and said nothing, and did not let go. Lee Jinho died doing what he loved, which was eating instant noodles in his underwear at 2 in the morning and ignoring every responsibility he had. So when he opened his eyes to a ceiling with golden chandeliers and silk curtains that cost more than his entire apartment, his first thought was, this is not my room. His second thought was, oh no. He sat up slowly. His hands were smaller, his hair was longer, and when he stumbled to the mirror in the corner of the enormous bedroom, a face he absolutely recognized stared back at him. Kim Si-woo, 17 years old, third son of a minor noble family, total background character, appeared on exactly 4 pages in the novel. A crown for 2 hearts. Mostly to pour tea and look decorative. Jinho, or Si-woo, apparently, pressed his forehead against the cool mirror glass and let out a long, suffering sigh. Okay, he said to himself. Okay, this is fine. I read this book 3 times. I know everything that happens. I just have to stay away from the main characters, not get involved in the plot, survive until the ending, and go home. Simple. Easy. No problem. He paused. I am so dead. The novel A Crown for Two Hearts was a beloved romance story about two men, Crown Prince Kale, cold and unreachable as winter ice, and Duke Aaron, warm and devastating as a summer storm. Their love story burned slow and beautiful across 420 pages. Jinho had cried at the ending. He had cried twice, actually. Once while reading it, and once while thinking about it on the bus. But he was not in their love story. He was a tea-pouring, background-standing, name-forgettable side character, which meant his only job was to not mess things up. The bedroom door swung open and a maid walked in, bowing quickly. Young Master Siwoo, the Crown Prince's morning gathering begins in 1 hour. Your presence has been requested. Jinhyo blinked. My what? Your presence. The Crown Prince requested you specifically. Jinho's left eye twitched. In the novel, Kim Siwoo had never been requested by the Crown Prince. Not once. Not even accidentally. The Crown Prince barely acknowledged people who were not Duke Aaron. This was already off script. He dressed carefully, trying to remember everything he knew about court etiquette from 400 pages of novel content. Bow at 30 degrees. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not stare at the Crown Prince. Do not trip over your own feet. Do not accidentally cause an international incident. The palace was stunning in a way that made Jinho's chest ache a little. He had read descriptions of it, the marble corridors, the gardens full of white flowers, the sound of fountains, but reading it and walking through it were two completely different things. It was real. Every stone, every scent, every cold draft of morning air. He found the gathering room and slipped inside, taking a place near the back with the other minor attendants. He exhaled. Good. He was invisible. He was background. He was exactly where Kim Siwoo belonged. Then, Crown Prince Kale walked in. Jinho had imagined Kale 100 times while reading. Tall, dark-haired, silver-eyed, with a face like it had been carved by someone who was angry at everyone who was less beautiful. And the real thing was, somehow, worse, better, both. Kale's gaze swept the room with the energy of a man who found everyone mildly disappointing. Then it landed on Jinho, and it stopped. Jinho's entire body went rigid. Do not make eye contact. Do not make eye contact. Do not... You, Kale said. The room went quiet. Every single head turned toward Jinho. He felt like a small, frightened rabbit that had somehow wandered into a room full of very well-dressed wolves. Me? Jinho said, in a voice much smaller than he intended. Kale walked toward him, actually walked toward him, across the entire room, and stopped 2 feet away. He looked at Jinho for a long, unreadable moment. I saw you in the East Garden yesterday, Kale said. You were talking to the roses. Jinho's face turned red. He had, in fact, been talking to the roses. He had been reciting the plot of the novel to himself quietly, using the rose bushes as his audience, because he was a deeply normal and well-adjusted person. I was giving them feedback, Jinho said carefully. Kale blinked. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth moved, just barely, a ghost of something that was almost a smile. Come to the afternoon garden session, Kale said. I want to hear more. He walked away. He walked away. The room stayed quiet for 3 full seconds. Then everyone started whispering. Jinho stood there, staring at the Crown Prince's retreating back, and thought with great clarity, I am so incredibly dead. Jinho had a plan. It was a good plan. It was a solid, reasonable, completely foolproof plan. Step 1. Attend the garden session. Step 2. Say something boring. Step 3. Be so uninteresting that the Crown Prince never looked his way again. Step 4. Go back to being invisible. Step 5. Survive the novel. The plan lasted exactly 4 minutes. The afternoon garden was even more beautiful than the morning one. Wide stone pathways between rows of carefully shaped trees, a stone table in the center, and about a dozen minor nobles all pretending to look casual, while clearly dying of nerves. Because Crown Prince Kale was already there, sitting at the table, reading something, Jinho slipped into a seat near the edge, behind 2 taller people, and congratulated himself on his invisibility skills. Siwoo, Jinho's eye twitched again. He stood slowly and walked to the seat directly across from the crown prince, because apparently that was his life now. "You're hiding again," Kale said, without looking up from his reading. "I prefer the term strategically positioned," Jinho said. Kale did look up at that. Those silver eyes landed on Jinho with the full weight of a person who was not used to being talked back to. Jinho's survival instincts screamed at him. His mouth, apparently, had not gotten the message. "That's a very long title for hiding behind someone's head," Kale said. "Thank you. I've been working on my vocabulary." There was a beat of silence. Then Kale made a sound. A very quiet, very short sound. It might have been a laugh. It might have been indigestion. Hard to tell. The garden session was supposed to be a light social gathering, but with the crown prince sitting there like a beautiful storm cloud, most people were too nervous to speak freely. Jinho, who had read this novel 3 times and knew Kale's entire personality breakdown, felt strangely calm. He knew Kale was not actually cruel, just closed, like a book locked with no key. The problem was that Jinho knew what the key was. He had read it. The key was Duke Aaron, the soft, laughing, golden-haired Duke who would walk into Kale's life in Chapter 12 and break every wall down, gently, like water finding its way through stone. Which meant Jinho needed to stay very firmly in the background until Chapter 12, when the real love story began, and not, under any circumstances, accidentally take a role that was not his to take. A small voice in the back of his head said, "But Kale looked at you first." Jinho told that voice to shut up. "You knew this garden," Kale said suddenly. Jinho looked up. "Sorry?" "Yesterday, you walked through it without looking for the path. You already knew where the paths were." Kale set down his papers. "You've never been to the palace before your family's recent appointment, so how did you know?" The air between them felt suddenly careful. Jinho's brain ran several calculations very quickly. He could not say, "I read a novel about this place." He could not say, "I memorized the layout from 400 pages of fiction." He could not say, "In my original world, I am a 23-year-old who choked on noodles." "I read a lot," Jinho said. "Maps, architecture, floor plans." Kale stared at him. "You read palace floor plans. For fun." "I have very specific hobbies." Another one of those ghost smiles. Jinho was beginning to feel like he was collecting them. The session ended as the sun slid lower. People filtered out slowly. Jinho stood, ready to escape, when a hand closed around his wrist. Light, barely a touch, but completely stopping. He looked down at Kale's hand, then up at Kale's face. "Tomorrow," Kale said. "Same time." It was not a request. Jinho walked back to his room with his heart doing something strange and loud in his chest. He sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall for a long moment. "This is fine," he told the wall. "This doesn't mean anything. Kale is just curious. Once Duke Aaron arrives, everything goes back to the original story. I am Kim Si-woo, side character. Nobody falls in love with the side character." The wall did not respond. Walls, Jinho had discovered, were not great at offering emotional support. He fell back onto the bed and stared at the golden ceiling and tried very hard not to think about the fact that when Kale's hand had touched his wrist, it had felt, for just 1 second, like something pulled tight inside him. "I am not catching feelings for the main character," Jinho said firmly to the ceiling. "I am a very sensible person." Outside his window, the palace bells rang for evening. Far away, in a golden carriage rolling toward the capital city, a man with warm eyes and a laughing mouth was getting closer. Duke Aaron was almost here. And Jinho, who knew exactly how the story was supposed to go, pulled his blanket over his head and tried to convince himself that the knot in his stomach was just dinner. It was absolutely not just dinner. Duke Aaron was everything the novel said he was. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in a carriage decorated with his family crest, a golden bird mid-flight, and the entire courtyard turned to look at him the way flowers turn toward sunlight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with honey-gold hair and dark, warm eyes, and a smile that landed on every person he looked at like it was made specifically for them. Jinho stood in the courtyard with the other minor attendants and felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. In the novel, Jinhyo had loved Eren. He was the warmer half of the central love story, the one who reached out first, who laughed loudly, who dragged Kale back to the world every time Kale tried to disappear into cold duty. In person, watching him actually walk across the courtyard and charm everyone within a 5-meter radius, Jinho felt something he had not expected. He felt jealous, which was insane, completely insane. He had no right to feel jealous. He was Kim Si-woo, tea pouring, background standing, nameless Kim Si-woo. Kale and Eren were supposed to fall in love. That was the whole story. Jinho was just a visitor inside it. "You look like someone stepped on your breakfast," said a voice beside him. Jinho turned. A boy about his age was standing there, narrow-faced with messy dark hair and an extremely unbothered expression. Jinho searched his memory. Right, Park Hazel, Kim Si-woo's only real friend in the novel. Appeared on 6 pages, mostly comic relief. "You're not fine. Your face is doing something tragic." "This is my normal face." "No, it's not. I've seen your normal face. Your normal face is blank. This face is actively suffering." Hazel squinted at him. "Is it about the Duke?" "No." "Is it about the Crown Prince?" Jinho opened his mouth, closed it. "No." Hazel looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone watching a friend walk slowly toward a fire. "Sure," he said. "Totally." The formal welcome dinner that evening was everything the novel described. Long tables, heavy candlelight, music from somewhere unseen, and food that Jinho was too nervous to properly enjoy. He sat near the end of the minor noble's table, doing his absolute best to be invisible. He managed it for about 20 minutes. Then Duke Eren sat down across from him, not next to the Crown Prince, where he was supposed to be, across from Jinho, at the minor noble's table, with the energy of someone who had simply sat where he felt like sitting, and dared anyone to question it. "You're Kim Si-woo, right?" Eren said, pouring himself some wine like they were old friends. "Kale mentioned you." Jinho's brain stopped processing language for a moment. "He... what?" "Mentioned you," Eren said cheerfully. "Said you were interesting." Kale never calls anyone interesting. Last person he called interesting was a very complicated piece of architecture. He smiled, and it was warm and genuine, and somehow made Jinho feel worse. "What did you do?" "I talked to roses," Jinho said flatly. Eren stared at him. Then he laughed. A real, full laugh that turned a few heads. "That's it? That's all it took?" "Apparently." Eren leaned forward on his elbow, looking at Jinho with those warm, dark eyes, and said, "I like you already." Jinho thought, "Of course you do. You're written to like everyone." Then he felt immediately guilty for thinking it, because Eren had done nothing wrong. He was exactly who he was supposed to be. He was wonderful. He was the right person to fall in love with Kale. Jinho knew that better than anyone. "That's very kind," Jinho said, with what he hoped was a normal smile. Later, when Jinho was walking back to his room, he turned a corner and nearly walked straight into Crown Prince Kale. They both stopped, 2 feet apart. Corridor lit by wall torches. Very dramatic, in Jinho's opinion. "You didn't sit with me at dinner," Kale said. "I'm a minor noble," Jinho said. "I can't sit at the main table. I could have had your seating changed." Jinho looked at him. "Why would you do that?" Kale said nothing for a moment. His jaw moved slightly, like he was choosing words and rejecting them. Finally, "Duke Eren sat with you instead." "He did," Jinho confirmed. "He's very friendly. He's friendly to everyone." "Yes." Another pause. Something crossed Kale's face, fast, there and gone, like a shadow over water. Then his expression went back to its usual carved ice calm. "Good night, Si-woo," he said. "Good night, Your Highness." Kale walked away. Jinho stood in the empty corridor and stared after him and had a terrible, sinking, completely unwanted realization. In the novel, Kale did not talk to side characters in corridors at night. In the novel, Kale did not notice who sat where at dinner. In the novel, Kale did not look at anyone the way he kept looking at Jinho. Something had already changed. The story had already shifted, quietly, just a little, like a river slowly finding a new path. And Jinho, who had memorized the original, could feel exactly how far it had moved. He pressed his back against the corridor wall and looked up at the ceiling. "I'm in trouble," he told the ceiling. The ceiling, like the wall before it, offered no help at all. There is a scene in chapter 14 of A Crown for Two Hearts, where Crown Prince Kale and Duke Aaron have their first real private conversation. A night garden, moonlight, Aaron saying something quietly honest, and Kale responding for the first time without armor. Jinhyo had read it 7 times across 3 different reads of the novel. He had cried at it twice. He was not supposed to be there when it happened. He absolutely, completely should not have been in the night garden on the evening it took place. But Hazel had sent him a note saying he needed help finding his misplaced court documents, which he had apparently left somewhere near the garden paths, and Jinho, being a good and loyal friend to a character he genuinely liked, had gone to help. He found the documents in the dark, tucked under a stone bench. He also found himself very close to 2 other people who were standing under a flowering tree, speaking in low voices, not aware he was there. He should have left immediately. He did not leave immediately, because his feet stopped working when he heard Kale's voice say something he had never said in the original novel. "I have been thinking about someone." Aaron's voice was gentle. "Tell me." "I don't know what to do with it. It's not something I've felt before." A pause. "He says strange things. He looks at the world like he already understands it, and then he looks at me like I'm something he hasn't read yet." Jinho's heart was beating very loudly. "That sounds like you like him," Aaron said simply. "I don't know if that's allowed," Kale said quietly. Jinho, pressed behind a stone pillar in the dark, realized 3 things at the same time. First, Kale was talking about him. Second, in the original novel, this scene was the beginning of Kale and Aaron's love story. Third, in this version, Aaron was not the person Kale was talking about. The story had changed. He had changed it just by existing, just by talking to roses and saying strange things, just by being somewhere slightly different than Kim Si-woo had ever been. He had changed the story. Jinho pressed himself against the pillar and breathed very quietly and tried to think. He had 2 choices. He could step out, say something awkward, be the flustered side character, give Kale a reason to distance himself, push the story back toward its original track. Kale and Aaron would still find their way to each other maybe. Stories wanted to happen the way they were written, they had gravity. Or he could do nothing. He slipped away without making a sound, through a side path, out of the garden. He walked back to his room and sat on the floor with his back against the bed, because somehow sitting on the floor felt more real than sitting on silk blankets. He had known, somewhere quiet and ignored, for several days now. The realization wasn't new. He just hadn't said it to himself yet in plain words. He liked Kale. He had memorized a fictional version of this man, and then met the real version, and somehow it was worse than anything he had prepared for. Because the real Kale was awkward in ways the novel never showed. He hesitated before he smiled. He noticed small things. Who sat where, who walked differently, who talked to flowers. He asked questions that showed he was actually listening. And he had said, "He looks at me like I'm something he hasn't read yet." And Jinhyo was, very unfortunately, completely done. "I'm an idiot," he told his knees, hugging them to his chest. The door opened. Haesol walked in holding the recovered documents with a very guilty expression. "Did you find them?" Jinhyo asked dully. "Yes." Haesol paused. "Did something happen?" "Nothing. Everything is fine." Haesol sat down on the floor across from him, which was the kind of thing good friends did without being asked. "You have your suffering face on again." "This is my normal face." "It is genuinely not." Haesol looked at him steadily. "Siwoo, what's happening?" Jinho stared at him. Haesol, Park Haesol, 6 pages of comic relief, was looking at him with entirely too much perception for a side character. "Have you ever read a story," Jinho said carefully, "and loved how it ended? And then you ended up inside it, and suddenly the ending you loved starts to feel like the wrong one?" Haesol was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's the most dramatic way anyone has ever said, 'I like someone.'" Jinho laughed despite himself, a short, helpless sound. "Yeah," he said finally, "I like someone. And this is a problem because he's not supposed to like me back." Jinho leaned his head against the bed behind him. "He's supposed to be with someone else. someone who's better for him, someone warm and brave and exactly right. Hazel tilted his head. Better according to who? Jinho did not have an answer for that. Outside the window, the palace was quiet. Somewhere in the garden, a night bird was singing. Jinho sat on his floor and held very carefully the terrifying possibility that maybe, the story he had read was not the only story that could be true. 3 days after the garden night, everything became significantly more complicated. Jinho was walking through the east corridor when he saw Lord Bastian. In the novel, Lord Bastian was the secondary villain, not the dramatic final boss type, but the quiet, dangerous type who worked in the background. His role was to isolate Kale from Duke Aaron during a critical political moment, cause a rift between them, and nearly succeed in separating them permanently. He appeared in chapters 16 through 22 and gave Jinho anxiety every single time, even on rereads. In person, he was even less likable. Tall, polished, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was standing in the corridor talking to one of Kale's personal attendants, and when Jinho passed, that smile turned toward him. "Young Master Siwoo," Bastian said pleasantly. "You've been spending quite a bit of time near the Crown Prince lately." Jinho smiled carefully. "Just fulfilling my family's court duties." "Of course," Bastian said. "It's just interesting. Kale has never taken interest in minor nobles before. One wonders what changed." The smile was still pleasant. The words were not. Jinho bowed politely and kept walking, and as soon as he was around the corner, he exhaled slowly and thought. He knows. He did not know exactly what Bastian knew, or suspected, or was planning. But Bastian was smart. The novel made that clear. And if Bastian had noticed that Kale's attention had shifted, he would want to understand why and whether it could be used. Jinho needed to talk to someone. He found Hazel in the library and told him everything. All of it. Which in hindsight was probably something he should have done earlier, considering Hazel was the only person in this world he trusted completely. Hazel listened to the whole explanation. Reincarnation, the novel, the plot, Kale, Bastian, with an expression of increasing stillness that Jinho recognized as him processing something huge. When Jinho finished, Hazel said, "So you're from another world?" "Yes." "And you read a book about this world?" "Yes." "And in that book the Crown Prince falls in love with Duke Aaron?" "Yes. But now he seems to be falling in love with you instead." "I think so. Maybe." Hazel nodded very slowly. "And there's a political villain who may have noticed." "Yes." Another long pause. "This is a lot," Hazel said. "I know. Can I have a moment?" "Take as many as you need."